What's up? Welcome to Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity, and today we're taking a look at The Chosen Season 3. The last two episodes are here, guys. Very, very close. Episode 7 is what we're going to look at today, specifically breaking down all the pieces that I think are important and what we're going to want to dive into today. So let's just jump in, and we're going to talk about every little bit of it here. Of course, we're going to do a long live stream like we always do, and then we'll break up these pieces later on, and this will just be for our Patreon and channel members. So if you're here live or during the premiere of this video, then thank you. Thank you for supporting us live and for hanging out with us here. But we'll also be doing a ton of other videos later on, and of course, you're going to want to be watching all of our Israel videos that we're putting out right now. There's a ton of work that's going into all of this, and we're kind of doing a lot right now. So we'd love your support and your help with basically everything. But let's go ahead and jump in and talk about episode 7, starting at the very beginning of the episode. There's a lot of stuff going on throughout this entire episode, and we'll kind of jump in and out and talk about kind of what's going on. But first we see Gaius and his family, and they are celebrating.
He went into the palace garden, but Haman, he stayed behind to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, just as Haman was falling onto the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence?"
Thank you so much. So what is going on here? We kind of guessed earlier on that we were actually going to see some sort of celebration within episode 7, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's actually a Jewish holiday, and now this is actually called Purim. We hear about this later on in the episode. I wasn't exactly sure which holiday this was, but this is called Purim, and this is a Jewish holiday that commemorates the saving of the Jewish people from Haman, an official of the empire during the time of Esther, right? So this is from the book of Esther, that we know Haman is like the bad guy, right? That was against kind of Mordecai and all those people in the book of Esther, and Esther was able to overcome, and obviously God led them through that situation. The book of Esther is really interesting, and this is a really cool kind of celebration that's happening here with the Jews. I had never heard about this before. So again, this is one of those things that the Chosen kind of brings in that teaches us more and more about Jewish culture and helps us to understand a bit more about their festivals and what goes on in their culture overall. Really, really interesting. But you kind of see these little moments here with the kids as they're, hyping up Haman as the bad guy, kind of like hissing at him. And then you see later as Zebedee actually sings a song as well during the celebration.
My own house?
This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day they rested and made that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday.
Now we also see Barnaby and Shula here in the house of Zebedee. This is a really cool thing. I'm glad that they got to go with someone. They didn't get to go with Mary, I guess, or other people. They decided to go with Zebedee's family, which is interesting because we haven't really seen that pairing before. Really, really cool to see Shula and Barnaby healed here, full and celebrating as Jews. This was actually the scene that was in the original season 3 trailer that we guessed was going to be the moment that, well, at least not the moment, but this gave us clarification that Shula was actually going to be healed. And so it's really cool to see this moment, and we can see everybody else kind of celebrating outside as well. We see music going on and a bunch of craziness here as everybody's kind of getting ready for the festival and seeing what's kind of going on. Really, really cool to see everybody. And of course, this brings us later on to the moment with Simon, as he is very, very upset right here. He's not doing very well. But Purim is kind of an interesting opening to this episode. It shows it really serves as a moment of difference between Simon and what he's going through, and the rest of the Jews as they're celebrating. They're celebrating, this deliverance from Haman. They're celebrating, Jewishness in a lot of ways, and that plays into this episode a ton. Not just in this moment as we're celebrating Purim, but also for Matthew's area. For Simon, as he's going through in this episode, how he belongs and how people respond to him and what he's not being saved from at the moment. I think it plays into a lot of different things in this episode, so really cool to see that. Let's move on next. We're going to go to Andrew and Philip and talk about their whole journey here. Andrew and Philip are obviously a huge part of this episode. And so let's kind of get into that. Again, I'm going to break these into episodes, so let me restart this and we'll get into it. What's up? Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity. And today we're going to be taking a look at The Chosen Season 3, Episode 7, and specifically we're going to be talking about Andrew and Philip. Now remember, they were together during the 2x2, and they went to a city called Nave. Now in Nave, they actually got kicked out, and because of what they said in Nave, it spread the gospel, or at least a portion of the gospel, into the Decapolis, and it really caused a lot of havoc there. They were dealing with a lot of different things, and really it just set the Decapolis on fire, is what Leander told them in episode 6. So now here we kind of look at their story and we begin to see how they're trying to fix it, and maybe they're making things even worse than what Leander said in episode 6. And so things just keep on popping up as they kind of go through. So let's take a look at these scenes and walk through the story with Andrew and Philip here.
Dragging your feet? I'm not. Every time I look, you're a few cubits farther back than before.
Well, I'm thinking and my thoughts are making my body heavy.
Can you stop thinking and walk?
After what we just saw?
All the more reason to move. Don't make this difficult.
You think the situation among the Gentiles isn't difficult?
Of course it is. Walking doesn't that...
I do love how he does seem to keep on getting further and further behind Andrew, even in this scene here as we're seeing him.
...to be. Or it does.
Oh, I hate these.
Oof. So we knew that this was going to happen. We knew that Philip was going to get hurt at some point because he it shows him walking with a staff in earlier trailers that we've seen of season 3 and of the finale. And so we knew that he was going to get hurt at some point, but we didn't know how big of a deal it was going to be. It doesn't seem to be the most important thing, at least in episode 7 here. Maybe it's going to play into episode 8 a little bit with little James or something. I could see that for sure. But here we're really seeing as this is less about Philip being hurt in a physical form. I think it's really more about Philip kind of being hit in his ego a little bit. This is something that we haven't really seen from Philip too often, because Philip has almost always been kind of in charge of the situation, and he's always been a guy that has been really focused on his journey and who he is as a disciple of John the Baptist and now of Jesus. And so we haven't really seen a faltering moment from Philip at all. He's been the guy who has done everything right so far. So now we're really seeing as he's encountering failure for the first time really in The Chosen. And so we're seeing as he's responding to that, and he's not responding well. He's really worried about what they've done and how they possibly could have messed a lot of things up. But we're going to see that kind of play out throughout this scene here.
You're bleeding.
Oh, thank you. I know what blood looks like.
Oh, wow.
Just go without me. I'm slowing you down anyway.
Are you suggesting you'll stay behind and die?
Maybe.
We saw this in the behind the scenes. The Chosen actually posted a bunch of photos about this as well.
Can you...
It seems like such a small thing, but I've been hurt like on my big toe like that before, and it hurts bad. So I totally get it. Now he could have also broken part of his foot or something as well. We're not 100% sure what the extent of the damage is here.
Perfect. Just perfect.
What?
Blood, carnage. It's a fitting end to our trip to the Decapolis.
No one was bleeding.
Yes, not from their skin, Andrew, but the whole place was torn apart. Just like this foot. And all because of our teaching.
You're the one who's supposed to be made for this.
Yes, I thought I was.
That is a huge line. You're the one that's supposed to be made for this. Yes, I thought I was. So he's starting to question his calling. He's starting to question his purpose as a missionary in a lot of ways.
That's what's so...
John caused controversy all the time.
Yes, but among the Jews, Andrew, we caused a multinational crisis on the verge of erupting into violence. Maybe even war. We might have blood on our hands. People might die because of us.
Yeah, one thing at a time. Yes, hold here. Blood on our hands. It's a little much.
We failed in our mission. Messiah gave us his words, and we didn't deliver. And if that doesn't upset you, then maybe it should, Andrew.
You'll need a walking stick.
We see the difference here in Andrew too, right? Like Andrew was the one that was freaking out last season. He was having a real hard time with everything that was going on. But now that he's spoken to John and kind of had this revelation and come a little bit further, he's maturing. We're seeing that change in Andrew coming from this super anxious person to now he's in control more, especially in this situation. He's dealing with this and he's kind of going through it. It's not as big of a deal as it would have been for him last season, for sure. Then we transition back to Capernaum, and we see as Judas is in this same place that he was counting money before, but now he's packing lunches.
Oh, welcome back.
At least someone's happy to see us.
He's a different Philip right now.
Well, for good reason.
Wait, what happened?
What are these?
Oh, I'm making packages of food for the homeless. Little James said it's a Purim tradition.
Purim. Completely forgotten.
How are we talking about holidays right now?
What do you mean? What happened at the Decapolis?
So everything's kind of falling apart. Philip is really, really freaking out, and he's seeing the immensity of the situation, and he's wanting everybody to understand how important it is, how crazy it is.
We made a mess.
We did not intentionally create a mess. We preached the words of our rabbi, and some people took issue. Where is the vinegar?
Oh, it's on the bottom table to the right. I rearranged the bottles. The way you had them organized before was very inefficient.
Decapolis is in full-scale meltdown, and you're over here rearranging cabinets.
How would he know?
Why do you need vinegar?
To disinfect the wound.
Why, so it doesn't spread through my mortal body and kill me?
Actually,
Philip is being so extra here. It's so funny. But Judas is actually, we see more of his business acumen here, right? We see more of his organizational skills and the skills that he's actually bringing to the group, which is cool to see more of his character kind of fleshed out.
yes.
Hades.
You still haven't told me what you did to the Decapolis?
Not what we did.
That's what we said.
To smooth things over?
Sometimes people respond better to stories than to teaching.
Oh, a parable. Oh, good. Which one?
The banquet.
I love a banquet.
You might as well just tell him what happened.
Yes, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Philip. So, Judas, it comes directly from Jesus, so it is perfect. Don't misunderstand.
Okay. But what?
But I think, perhaps, Jesus shares it when he wants a challenge.
So we're going to hear Jesus talk about this parable later on, but let's talk about where this actually comes from. So one of the locations where it's at is in Luke chapter 14. And so here we are at Luke chapter 14 in the ESV. And let me just read this parable to you, and we can kind of walk through and see how they reference it throughout this conversation and the next here. So the parable of the great banquet. He also said to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do you not when you give a dinner or banquet, do not invite your friends. Do not invite your friends or brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. They also invite you in return, and you are repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. When one of those who reclined at the table heard these things, he said to him, Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. But he said to him, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, Come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please, have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen. I have to go examine them. Please, have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame. And the servant said, Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room. And the master said to the servant, Go out to the highways, to the hedges, and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of these men who were invited shall taste my banquet. So this parable is really talking about those that will be invited into the kingdom of heaven, right? All have been invited, but only a certain amount will come. Some will give excuses, or some will get distracted by other things. But those that are even on the furthest edges will be invited and welcome into the banquet. And so this is a really encouraging parable, especially for us Gentiles, right? Those that are coming outside of the Jewish faith. Basically, it's saying the Jews will be invited, and then everybody else will be invited, and even to the furthest edges, everyone will be invited. This is a very good parable, but it's kind of confusing, and it's almost insulting in a way, because at some points, some people could take this as, saying that they're less than the other people that were invited first. Why weren't they invited first? Why aren't they the first people to be asked to come to the banquet? And so that's what they're kind of saying here. They've been telling this parable, and it made things worse because everybody took it in a different way. And some people liked it, but some people hated it and were very offended by it. So let's continue on and see how they dealt with the situation.
Were you challenged?
Oh, yes.
Challenged? Yes, the challenge is fair, yeah.
So it goes like this. One time, there was a rich man who's throwing a big party.
It's this big banquet. He wants everybody to come to it.
So he sent his servant out to all those invited, saying, Everything is ready, it's time, come.
Only the guests that he's inviting are making excuses. The first says, I've just bought the field. I must go out and look it over. Please excuse me.
And another said, I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I must examine them, therefore I cannot come. And another said, I've just married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.
So they basically go through the scripture exactly how it is. Really, really cool. I love that they talk about that, because we don't often get to think about how the disciples would have told these parables and how they would have communicated those things as well beyond Jesus in their own missionary journeys or after Jesus' resurrection, right? So it's interesting to kind of see how they would think through this. It's cool.
Perfectly legitimate reasons.
Even our own people
Someone
echo.
in the crowd said that exact same thing.
So the servant reported these things to...
And Judas is right here. Those are perfectly legitimate reasons not to go to a dinner party. But again, the parable is talking about the kingdom of heaven. This is the dinner party, right? This is the biggest thing. And so it's not as light as just missing a dinner. This is life or death. This is eternal life or death.
The master, and the master of the house became very angry, and he said to the servant, Go to the streets of the city and bring back the poor and crippled and blind and lame.
So he did, and they came, only there was still room left over in the banquet, so he said, Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled.
You said this to a mixed crowd?
We did not know the extent to which the crowd was mixed.
So
we heard about this in last episode. As Leander's talking to them, they didn't know that there were so many different groups. They knew that there was Gentiles but they were primarily trying to speak to the Jews because that's what Jesus asked them to go out and do. And so we're seeing a lot of this season, of the difference between Jews and Gentiles. And I think the season's finale is going to bring us even more of this. And so as Andrew and Philip are just they're trying to wrap their heads around, how do we speak to the Jews and not impact all these other people? Well, you can't. When you're speaking the truth of the gospel, it's going to impact everybody. And so they're starting to realize what's actually happening here. It's interesting.
Go out and find some leftovers did not exactly play well.
Well, it should have. God wants everyone to come to the party.
The master said, I want my house filled. Everyone is invited.
Okay, so tell me if I have this right. The Jews understood you to mean that Jesus was calling for Gentiles, and the Gentiles thought you were calling them second class.
Yep.
And then the conservatives, who lived by Jeremiah, would have heard you saying that the original guests who didn't want to go to the banquet would miss the party. And those, better versed in Isaiah, behold, I am doing a new thing, were probably emboldened, except that Gentiles were there.
Yeah. So, so Judas explains this pretty well. He's basically going through each group and saying how each group is going to be upset by this parable in particular, and that all of them, have this different take on what the parable means for them, which is very true. This happens all the time, right? Like a preacher could talk about a story in a sermon and talk about the word of God, and then someone takes it a different way and is offended by it. It always happens, even on our channel, right? People comment on our videos all the time that they're offended about a certain thing, or they didn't like what I said, or they didn't like how I said it, right? And so because of these different perceptions that people have, it's always difficult to get a perfect message across to all of them. But obviously this one in particular is causing a real big ruckus in the Decapolis.
Yeah, that's about right.
How did you know that?
I am a businessman. It's my job to know people, and I've met all kinds.
It was demoralizing.
Maybe you're over-identifying your role in it.
Would people be brawling in the streets of the Decapolis, Judas, if we hadn't gone there and preached?
Brawling? Boys, it is way too early for the war. We have to be smarter.
That's interesting too. He said it's way too early for war. We have to be smarter. So again, remember when we talked about Judas's very first entrance into the show, we know that he was really dealing with this perception of the Messiah, that he was going to build an army. We actually see this at a later point with Shmuel in this episode as well, as someone else is indicating that they're the Messiah and that they're going to build an army in this certain location. But here we're seeing as Judas is actually saying that too, that he's saying, oh, it's too early for that. He's not saying it's not going to happen, but that it's going to happen later on. And that's still his mindset. When he was talking with his sister, it's very similar, right? He was talking about how they're going to overthrow the Romans and all this stuff is going to happen. This was the general mindset of the Jews. Now, while some of the disciples are starting to understand more of who Jesus is, Judas doesn't quite get it. And I don't think that he ever truly will understand who Jesus is or what he's trying to do. He's going to keep on having this, more prominent vision of who the Messiah is supposed to be, just like the Jews do today. A lot of Jewish people today have this view of the Messiah that he's going to be a military leader. And so, it's a very common thing that this would have happened to Judas. And it's interesting that he still has that mindset even here. Really cool to see that character movement in him as well, or at least that stabilization of who we should expect Judas to be.
Purim Sameach.
Not? Come on, it's a holiday, not Shiva.
So we'll move forward and we'll find another spot here. We've got some more spots with Andrew and Philip as they all meet together as a group. Now here they're kind of explaining what's going on with the group and explaining why it's important for them to deal with this issue overall. So let's check this out.
And what was your strategy to clarify it?
Well, we told...
We tried to tell one of your parables.
Parables. Good. That's what I would have done. Which parable?
The banquet.
The one where the guests give excuses not to come, and so everyone else gets invited.
You chose the banquet?
People get upset by that one.
Of course they do.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, we first considered the wheat and the tares, but we thought better of it.
I already told you. Some people wouldn't understand that parable.
I'm not even sure I understand the wheat and the tares.
Give it time.
The problem is that they did.
Now, this was a very common thing too. Even for Jesus, when he's talking about parables, many people did not understand any of the parables that he said because they didn't have ears to hear and eyes to see. And even the disciples many times didn't understand fully what he was actually trying to say. And so he had to explain it to them back behind the scenes later on. This was a very common thing that happened in scripture. And so we're seeing that kind of play out in real time with these random people that are hearing these parables, and they're getting really upset because their interpretation is slightly off.
Understand the parable, and it caused fights in the street.
Fighting between Jews and Gentiles.
Leander's told us it's getting worse every day. The prominent Hellenistic priest has changed his ways, which is good, but when he abdicated his duties as priest and leader, others tried to fill the void. And so projects are going undone, and people are just angry and blaming each other for everything.
It led to stealing, fights in the streets. Many people are actually leaving their homes to escape the violence.
That's the environment you suggest sending us into?
What part of the parable caused this fight to break out?
The people outside the city, the ones on the highways and the hedges, the last to be invited and the last to accept the invitation.
That's what I suspected.
So they're getting offended because they're being told that they are the highways and the hedges. They are the people who are furthest, right, from the center of from the center of the kingdom of heaven, really, the furthest from God. And that's not necessarily the point of the parable. The point of the parable is that everyone is invited. That even these, right, that didn't even know that God exists, right? Those that don't even know of anything that's happening in Christianity or with the Messiah, even they're invited to the kingdom of heaven. And so having that in mind, you know, it is such a wonderful and gracious and merciful thing, but it could be taken the wrong way, right? As an offense to them and saying that they're not worthy or they're not good enough to be invited first. Yeah, it's a hard parable, right?
Speaking of which, the highways and hedges, does that actually refer to Gentiles?
He who has ears to hear, let him hear. We leave in the morning. Everyone go home, gather your things. We take to the highways and the hedges before dawn. Boys, this is part of it. You try and carry heavy things. Sometimes one gets dropped. But we pick it up and keep going forward.
I love that comforting moment there at the end from Jesus, just sharing with them like, hey, it's going to be okay, you know? Yes, yeah, you failed a little bit here. Yeah, you dropped the ball a little bit, but it's all good. Let's move on from here. Let's continue to get better from here. And it's such a cool, relatable moment because I felt that so much. You know, God will ask me to do something and I'm not equipped, right? And so I try my best and I fail, but that is part of the process. This is part of Philip and Andrew's growing, right? Philip can't come into the chosen. We talked about this last season a little bit because I felt like Philip came in a little bit too strong of this, you know, this amazing character who kind of knew everything, and he was a mentor to everybody, and he took care of Matthew, and he taught Andrew, and he was really set. Even in the case of John being arrested, he was pretty calm and level-headed, and he made the right decisions there when Andrew was really freaking out. So this is the first moment that we're really seeing that type of character development for Philip specifically, and it's great. I love seeing that because we all fail, right? Including these disciples, including Simon Peter and Philip and Andrew and all of them, right? It's not just doubting Thomas that has issues, it's all of them. And so as humans, we need to see more of that. And so I love that The Chosen is kind of pointing that out and building him out as a character, building all of them out as characters. Really, really cool to see that. All right, cool. Well, let's move on to the next section. We've got Andrew and Philip. Let's talk about Thomas. Let's talk about Thomas being back and some of the some of the key points that brought us to him, because Thomas being back and sharing what he shares is really, really interesting, and kind of diving into that. So let's talk through that. Let's get to that section here. All right, here we go. Let's start another section. Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity. And today we're talking about The Chosen Season 3, the last two episodes, so episode 7. And of course, if you've already seen 7 and 8 in theaters, we're trying to keep the spoilers to episode 8 down to a minimum. So let's talk about episode 7 specifically here and talk about Thomas. Thomas is obviously a character that's been part of the season, been part of the disciples, the apostles, since season 1. And him and Rhema were a big part of season 1 and season 2, and kind of everything that happened in there, creating the group that Jesus is now, leading. Now, we saw earlier in the season that Thomas went off to ask Kaphne, Rhema's father, for her hand in marriage. And we had a lot of different theories about this. A lot of you thought that they were going to get married, that they were happy for everything. I thought that this was probably not going to happen, and that looks to be more the case of what's kind of happening here. Now, let's check out this scene where Thomas returns and kind of talks about this a little bit, and we see how upset he is, how broken he is, and how sad he is about the whole situation, that it didn't go exactly as he planned or as he wanted it to. So let's bring this up and let's check out this small scene here.
This is very well written.
I'll just have to trust you on that.
You cannot read? That must be very limiting.
This wasn't my choice.
You could
This
learn.
may be a setup.
You're very intelligent.
This may be a setup for later on. Maybe Tamar is going to learn how to read and become a part of the ladies that are kind of learning as well. Who knows?
Thomas.
Hello, Matthew.
We can see immediately as he comes in, the tone of his voice is very low. It's very monotone. He's just like, hey, what's up? He's very low here. He's not super excited to be, a part of this or here where he is right now, or at least he's not excited to announce the news that he has.
Did Rama return as well?
Hey, how did it go?
It's complicated.
Where's Rema?
Did her dad say no or something?
Oof. Nathaniel, of course, always speaks his mind, and I love that about him, but sometimes he can just stick his foot right in his mouth. That's really, really hard. For Thomas, if her dad did say no, it would be like, just a kick in the stomach for sure. So here, Nathaniel, again, is just speaking from his mind. That's what he does. And John looks over at him like, did you seriously just say that?
I mean, he didn't say no. Brema stayed behind in Teldor.
Oh. Well, at least you're back, huh?
Huh?
Thomas. Is Rema...
Brema stayed behind to work on Kaphne.
That's got to be hard. Everybody's coming in one by one, and they keep on asking the same question over and over again. And all of them are slowly kind of coming to this realization of, oh, this is not good.
He's not a believer.
In Jesus? You know that?
In me.
That's hard. So he says, she stayed behind to work on Kaphne. He's not a believer. And Nathaniel says, in Jesus? Yeah, we knew that. And he says, no, in me. Obviously, he's not a believer in Jesus yet, but he's also not a believer in Thomas. Now, this is a very expected thing, at least from my point of view. From my point of view, of course he wouldn't like Thomas. Thomas doesn't have a job anymore. Thomas is a random nomad who is traveling with this guy who seems to be attracting a ton of attention, and it could be dangerous. This is a dangerous sort of dangerous group for him to send his daughter into and allow Thomas to take her. Yeah, it's crazy. Now, one of my theories is that this couldn't really take place here because the marriage system in Judaism is not as easy as, kind of getting a certificate and ta-da, you're married. You have to go through a process, and there's a lot of different things that happen here. And as far as we know, Thomas doesn't have any money that he could offer to Kaphne anyway for his daughter's hand in marriage. So there's a lot of different things that are kind of happening here. And I'm interested to see how it does play out in episode 8 and further down the line in season 4. But that's hard to hear, that Kaufman's not a believer in him. I have actually been in this exact place. When I asked for Vanessa's hand in marriage, her father was not a fan either. So it was actually a very similar place that I was into Thomas here, which is interesting.
It's disappointing. Are you embarrassed?
Nathaniel.
He didn't say no. He just didn't say yes. Rema's working on him. We're hopeful. Wait.
Oh man, again, Nathaniel just speaking his mind. Are you embarrassed? Of course he's embarrassed. Of course he's having trouble with this. This is a hard time. I mean, if you ask someone for their hand in marriage and her dad is stopping that from happening, especially during the Jewish period, right? It shows that the dad doesn't believe in you, that he has no faith that you're going to be a good husband, and that your family is good enough and everything, right? Now, Kaufman knows all about Thomas. He knows that he doesn't have a father. He knows that he doesn't have a family like set up in a good way, which would have been important to him. He knows that he doesn't have a ton of money, especially now that he's traveling with Jesus and all this is happening. He's not stable. He's not a good pick for his daughter. And in a lot of ways, that's just very true. And so we'll see how that plays out. I have a feeling that we're going to see some cool scenes in episode 8. At this point, I have not watched episode 8. So if you're watching this premiere on YouTube right now, I have not watched episode 8. Obviously, I'm traveling in Israel at this moment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. I'm really excited to see the future of not just Thomas and Rema, but of Kaufman and what happens with him. And is Rema even going to be a part of the story in the future, or is it just going to be a storyline that we saw here? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but I'm excited to see that in the future seasons and in episode 8. All right. Continuing on. 2 things down. A couple things down, actually. Two. And let's go to Matthew and Mary. So we'll actually start right here on this scene as we see everybody kind of exit this scene and gonna go into that. So let's start another one. Here we go. Welcome to Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity, and today we're going to be taking a look at The Chosen, Season 3, Episode 7. Really good episode overall. What did you guys think about it? I really thought that this one was amazing. It was a great setup, and it really, I think it's going to do an amazing job to jump us into Episode 8. And so we'll see how that all goes, but this scene, or these scenes that we're going to look at right now, are to do with Matthew and Mary, and specifically Matthew, obviously. We've been talking about for weeks now that Matthew is going to return as this kind of Jewish person in his own right, and how we're going to see him walk back into the faith in a lot of ways. And so I'm excited to see how that plays out for him and how he becomes more integrated into the group. But here we get a lot of information about his past, where those tzitzit came from. They weren't just random tzitzit. They were actually very, very important. And so we're going to see where those came from, why they were important, why Matthew didn't wear them, and how he's encouraged to kind of walk back into that. So let's go to this scene here where we first see Mary and Matthew kind of come together and start having this discussion right here.
Smells nice over here.
The holy anointing oil of the first press. Sad news about Thomas and Rama, huh?
It is. Matthew, I have something I wanted to ask you.
You do?
I love this little part here because it's keeping that love interest alive for Matthew and Mary. We've known since season 1 that this might be a thing, and so The Chosen keeps on hinting at it over and over again. It might be a payoff in later seasons because I don't see it happening right now. but who knows? We haven't seen any real evidence that it's actually going to happen later on in the future. Kind of flash forwards with Matthew or Mary Magdalene. They were never together in any of those scenes. So we haven't really seen too much of that. But I'm interested to see, what kind of happens as we move forward in these seasons. As she says, I have a question to ask you. And he goes, oh, you do? Huh? Like, obviously, it's very clear that he's picking up on these cues and he's wanting more interest to be there.
Yesterday, I was upstairs and I was moving some things around and I came across a box with prayer tassels inside.
What are you going to ask me about them?
Why were they hidden away?
Why is unimportant? They were hidden for a reason. Did that occur to you?
So if we remember from the last episode, we saw as Mary went up into the upstairs of Matthew's house, she was going to get the money from Judas to give to Zebedee in order to purchase more stuff, ash, and different things to help with the soil in the olive grove. While she was in that chest, of course, there's a ton of Matthew's old stuff all over the place, but specifically she saw that he had a pair of, or a collection of tzitzit that were in that box. And tzitzit are a signifier of someone being Jewish. They're like prayer tassels is what she calls them here. And they signify the Torah, they signify the law, and the law surrounding that person, right? So these are very important. And she realizes, oh, Matthew doesn't wear these. I wonder why they're here. And so we're going to get a little bit more backstory on why that is and how Matthew feels about it. But here he overreacts quite a bit.
I put them back, of course. It was an accident. I told you. I just wondered.
I'm very glad that you were staying at my old house, but I would ask you to please not go through my personal belongings anymore.
Matthew, wait.
Oof, hard one right there. We see as Matthew definitely overreacts, and he's definitely dealing with that whole circumstance, trying to figure out what's going on there. But we see again, Mary is sitting in that same room, and she's weaving a basket this time. And we see as Matthew comes in, and they begin to have the conversation again. So let's jump to that. This is really cool, by the way, the basket weaving.
Mary.
Matthew, please forgive me. It was none of my business.
You aren't the one who needs to apologize. I'm very sorry for my outburst.
And again, we know that Matthew is supposed to be portrayed as on the spectrum of autism, so this would be a very normal thing for someone on the spectrum. They have these outbursts sometimes when they feel overwhelmed or they don't know how to deal with a situation. It would be very common for them. And so, of course, Matthew has had time to calm down and he's had time to think about it. And so now he's coming back and readdressing the situation.
Your feet, they're covered in mud.
Oh, Jesus is always going away to his lonely places, and I thought I would try it.
Oh. How was it?
Barely stepped out into the fields before I found myself trudging through mud.
Now, of course, especially throughout this season more than any other season, we're seeing as Jesus is going off alone and praying and being with God. And so this is a very common thing that happened in Scripture. And so Dallas is really using this as a story momenter in a way. Momenter? I don't know. A story pusher in a lot of ways where he's allowing Jesus to go off and come back. And when he's away, we see more of the disciple stories. And when he comes back, he's swarmed by people and we see these big biblical stories. And so Matthew says, well, I've seen Jesus go off and he's going to his lonely place, all these times. And Matthew has seen this firsthand, right? During season 2, when they're preparing for the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew was there when Jesus was off in his lonely places a lot of times. And he would see him go off and pray and do these different things. And so Matthew is now trying to imitate that. And something that we all should do, really. We should all have those moments with God where we go away and we just spend time with him and we ask for guidance and we walk in that. But Matthew is having a little bit of struggles because of the mud that's going on there as well. But but I love the way that Paris acts this out, actually. It's really, really well done.
I took it as a sign to come back and apologize.
I love his reaction to the mud here. He's just like, get it off me.
I explained.
So here we get a flashback back in time, but we don't know exactly when this is, what year this is. The timeline for Matthew's tax collecting area is kind of weird. This could be, a few weeks before Jesus calls him. It could be a few years before Jesus calls him. We're not exactly sure where this fits in the timeline, or even how long Matthew was a tax collector, because we weren't giving an exact time frame of how old he is or what's kind of going on there. So it's kind of hard to tell. But obviously Gaius is still here, so we see as, they have their relationship going on, and Matthew's obviously a tax collector, so this is back in time in Capernaum, we're guessing, because it's the exact same tax booth that we saw earlier in the season, or earlier in the series.
Just as I planned. Late in the afternoon on the 6th day, no line.
You arranged for there to be no line at this time?
Someone else did. Long time ago.
Now, this is extremely important, right? We see this guy appear out of nowhere, and Matthew's kind of freaked out about it, right? Now, we saw this in the trailer, that they revealed this guy, and he talks about, more valuable than gold, more precious than rubies, which we're going to hear in a second. But this guy in particular, we know him from the original pilot of The Chosen, even before season 1, called The Shepherd. And he played one of the shepherds that were, there when the angels appeared, and then they went and saw Christ. So one of the things that's really interesting about this character is, guessing his age in The Shepherd, he seemed to be, 50s, 60s, like at the very least, right? Like he seemed pretty old in that time. And so if we're guessing that he's in 50s or 60s and that this is maybe a few years before Jesus calls Matthew, then this is at least like a 28 to 29 years later, possibly even 30 years later from the time that we saw, Jesus being born. And so this is let's say it's 28 years later, right? That makes him like in his 80s, like 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s, like late 70s, late 80s. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Again, we don't have an exact timeline, but he would be very, very old here. So originally I was criticizing this more when we first saw him. I thought maybe he's playing a different character. Maybe they just brought him back as a callback or like an Easter egg. But no, this is the same character, and we're going to see that in a second. But the importance of it is that like he's actually acknowledging, hey, I'm about to go. Like I am old, right? So it's good the way that they played it here. Makes it a little bit more believable for sure, and it fits way more with how things are going here. But let's see how the scene plays out.
Oh, never mind. You really never noticed. You seem like someone who notices things.
Thank you. Traffic does slow down late on the 6th.
Thank you so much.
Because everyone is at home preparing for Shabbat.
Shouldn't you be doing that?
Shouldn't you?
So he says, shouldn't you be preparing for Shabbat? And he says, shouldn't you? Again, calling out his Jewishness. And Matthew immediately kind of sinks. He doesn't believe that he belongs in a Jewish place. He doesn't believe that he deserves to be called Jewish because of the position that he's in, the thing that he's chosen, and the way that other people have treated him. The Jewish people have treated him horribly. They would kill him if they had the chance, right? He's a tax collector. And his father even says that he has no son. So this is a big, big pain point for Matthew.
Are you here to satisfy your tax requirement? Why didn't you want there to be a line?
Maybe I wanted all your attention for myself. Besides, who wants to wait in a line? I am Matthew, son of her son, from the tribe of Benjamin.
We only require one name.
Now, very cool that his name is Matthew from the tribe of Benjamin. Really, really interesting because it correlates so much to who Matthew is as a person and having that name correlate, right? Like he's obviously super Jewish and he's met the Messiah, right? Which we're about to see and see how that impacts Matthew. Really interesting how they decided to play this out here. They're making it very obvious that this is supposed to be a correlation between the two of them.
And one ancestor.
I know that. Maybe being from the tribe of Benjamin is the last thing I have to be proud of. What tribe are you from?
I don't discuss those things.
He was the favorite of Jacob's 12 sons.
I thought Joseph was the favorite.
Ah, you do discuss these things, huh? If he wasn't the favorite, at least he was the baby of the family and the only other son born of Jacob's true beloved, Rachel.
Something's not right.
You might say that.
Your adjusted income from last year is not commensurate with the amount you owe. Did you come into a large sum of money?
No.
So Matthew, obviously going through his tax records, he's trying to figure out what's going on here because this guy seems to owe a ton of debt, like a lot of debt, but he doesn't know why because it doesn't seem like his income has been that high or if he's come into a lot of money or anything else, but his debt is very, very high.
Tax liability is the highest in Capernaum. I don't even think it's possible to have incurred this much debt, even in a sudden change of fortune. Wait a minute, what are all these reassigned figures and transfers?
Son, I do not have many more days left on this earth.
I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Oh, that. I bought all the debt of my children and my family and put it under my name.
Now, again, this is a correlation to Christ, right? He's almost being like a Messiah-like figure, at least to his family here, right? He's taking on their debt for himself so that he would be the one to endure the punishment of that. And of course, he's doing this in a very sly way because he's very old and he knows he doesn't have very much time left. And so if he takes on that debt, he's obviously sparing his family from having to deal with all of that and dealing with it himself.
I've just never seen this is such a staggering achievement of financial acumen. I must say I'm impressed.
I have seen everything I need to see. And I am ready to meet my maker again.
Again, that subtle hint that he's one of the shepherds from earlier on. I'm ready to meet my maker again. This doesn't compute with Matthew. He doesn't even acknowledge it, I don't think. But we see as he's saying, I've met the Messiah, I've met God, and I'm ready to meet him again, just in a different way.
Surely with your brilliance, you have also prepared the way to pay this.
You know, Benjamin was not his original name. Rachel died moments after giving birth to him, and as her soul was departing, she called him Ben-Ani, son of my sorrow. Later on, Jacob changed it to Benjamin, son of my right hand.
Gaius and Matthew are just like, this guy's crazy, man. It's like those crazy people when you go into Walmart, you know? You just kind of like nod and shake your head. That's how Matthew feels right now.
That was kind of him.
Do you have any land? Assets? Savings?
He's just trying to like get through this. He's like, hey, can we figure this out? Like, do you have any way to solve this? Because, because I don't see any way that you're going to get out of this, bro.
Anything you can sell off to fulfill this unthinkable sum.
In thinking back on it, I think old Emma Rachel was correct. Son of my sorrow.
Why would you do this? You will be arrested and placed in a Roman labor camp.
But they will not be able to touch my children. I did all this legally, mind you.
I know.
Just making sure the Romans know, hey, I did this legally, so you can't touch my kids, you can't touch my family. It's all on me. which is a really interesting thing. I wonder how the tax system works. I don't know exactly how this would have worked. Like, would the debt have absolved whenever he died? I assume so, because that's what it seems like this scene is saying. And so he's willing to take on any punishment that he has to for the rest of his life, as long as his family is absolved and they're all okay. They won't have to deal with the debt.
I am astonished. And it would be very unpleasant for you.
Honestly, how long do you think I will last in a labor camp?
You are shrewd.
To answer a question, no. I have no assets. I could have kept what little money I had and let others pay their share, but to what end? To watch them struggle as I have struggled my entire life as a shepherd?
I thought human sacrifice was against our religion.
But symbolic self-sacrifice is not.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Matthew is kind of correlating what this guy is doing with human sacrifice. And he's saying, I thought that was against our religion. And here it's interesting that he says our religion, because he's adding himself into that. So obviously this moment here is bringing him back into the fold at least a little bit. But then we hear the older Matthew say, but self-sacrifice is not, which again is clearly pointing to Jesus and his self-sacrifice and what he went through. This is a big point of Judaism, actually, self-sacrifice and loving people so much that you would give your life for them.
Besides, I will not be the one running the sword through, huh?
He's saying, I'm not going to be the one that kills myself anyway. I'm not self-sacrificing in that way. I'll just step in the way of the sword for other people. In this case, my family and my children.
Take no pleasure in doing this. I have no choice but to place you under arrest.
I understand. Thank you.
Matthew doing his job, and the man just allowing it to happen. In fact, saying, thank you. This has been my plan the entire time.
May I gift you?
Gift?
Gratuity. For your wonderful service and kindness in listening to me go on.
It is not customary.
In truth, these are the most valuable things I own.
An asset?
More valuable than gold, more precious than rubies.
I may be able to help you liquidate it. We could work together. A ledger coming up this short on a balance this big reflects very poorly on my performance.
That's true. That is very true. As Matthew kind of goes through this, he is thinking less about this guy's struggles and what he's actually going to deal with. I think he's probably thinking more about how this is going to affect him and how the Romans view him as a tax collector. Because if he has this big of a debt that he can't collect, then he's not a very good tax collector, right? And that's going to reflect very poorly on him. So immediately when he sees a light at the end of the tunnel, he's like, oh, we have to take this. I have to look good. I have to do my job well, which is what Matthew's focus has always been on, right? Doing his job well. And so when he sees this, he's kind of disappointed, but let's see how it plays out.
These are one of a kind. They date back to the first exile, made from the world's most exquisite tequila.
Well, there must be a buyer for it. If the amount settles the debt, you will be spared.
I encourage you to consider keeping them for yourself.
So this is interesting. We see another parallel here between Jesus's bridal, right, and these as well. We've seen this connection throughout this season of kind of these old things and this Jewish heritage being very important to everybody in this time, which it would have been. If someone had an artifact like this, they would have treasured it highly because it would have linked them back to their ancestors, back to the exile, and in Jesus's case with the bridal, back all the way to the Exodus. So there's a lot of significance in this, and Matthew is seeing the value, but it's a little bit different for him than for this man, right? And so it's interesting to see how they both kind of perceive what's going on here.
Please, we are not relatives. Don't use that word.
No.
And that is a triggering word for Matthew, right? When he says son, it's a very triggering word because his dad told him that he has no son. So, of course, he would be agitated by that.
I have made up my mind. I want you to have them. You chose this occupation. I know you have no use for these now, but someday you might need them.
And again, keeping with that father theme, what did his dad tell him in episode 1 of season 3? You chose this occupation. You chose to work for the Romans, right? And so it's mirroring those same words in a different fatherly figure that he's now being, approached by. And so now this fatherly figure is saying, you chose this occupation, but in the future, you might need these. And so he's kind of giving him this opportunity to seek out being Jewish again and really truly seek out the Messiah, as he's kind of being a representation of that even to Matthew.
That is very unlikely. I will put these on the market and see what we can do.
Officer, I confess.
Again, he's ready to self-sacrifice. He's ready to go. Gaius is still thinking that he's a crazy person, so he's not quite ready to take that on.
Don't worry, old man. Someone will come to collect you.
I will look for a buyer.
You know the true value of these. No man will be able to meet their price. Shabbat shalom, young man.
And we can see how old he is. They're intentionally kind of giving him this feel of like he's about to go any second.
More valuable than gold.
More precious than rubies, he said. I kept them to respect the genius of that man. I also kept them as a reminder of the sins against my people.
Why?
I want to understand things, Mary. Especially inscrutable things that unsettle me. And this was the most mysterious of them all.
It's almost as if he felt like God was speaking to him, right? And he didn't know why, but he needed to keep them. He didn't know why all this stuff was happening, but he needed to be a part of what was happening there.
I have so many regrets. If I were to get those tassels praised and sold, I would only incur more regret, and I couldn't bear it.
It wasn't about the tassels. They're just a symbol. That man wanted you to have his faith. That was the last thing he had, his most valuable thing in the world. And you have it. That man wanted you to be Jewish again, and you are. It was his dying wish.
Now, I love this scene because the relationship here between Mary and Matthew is obviously they have a strong friendship and they're kind of growing in that relationship. But this also mirrors the exact same conversation that Tamar had with Mary earlier on, where they were both hurting and they were both dealing with things. Now here it's Mary kind of sharing her lesson that she learned through that, how she has all of this shame and guilt and she didn't want to allow herself to belong and really truly be the person that she needs to be. Now Matthew's having that same issue. Matthew doesn't want to, feel like he wants to feel like he's worthy, but he doesn't feel like he's worthy, right? He doesn't feel like he's good enough. He doesn't feel like he deserves all of these things. And so as we kind of see Mary really dive into who he is, she's seeing this shame and guilt. It's easily recognizable for her because it's something that she deals with. And so here she's really, really helping Matthew kind of work through that and make it, easier for him to kind of transition back into Judaism and walk in that and really own it in a lot of ways. And so it's very cool to see that friendship and that those lessons being transferred from person to person.
Why would he want that for someone like me?
Because sometimes God sends a dove.
A dove?
I never told anyone this before, but the day I met Jesus was the same day I was ready to end my life.
What?
I was going to leap from a great height.
Back to season 1, episode 1.
A dove caught my eye. I couldn't resist following it. And it led me to the place where I met Jesus.
Which was a bar, by the way.
That old man was your dove.
God using these things to lead them towards himself.
Our lives have often been painful, yes? So we think life is full of scarcity and not abundance. But then there are those times when, out of nowhere, somehow the world expresses its longing to be whole. And suddenly God steps in. And we are pulled out of our blindness.
Yeah, very true, right? I love the way that she's kind of forming this, where the world expresses its interest in being whole, and God is right there to respond, right? God is never so far away that we can't get to him until it's too late, right? And so as humans, as people in this world that are broken and that are selfish and that are dealing with our sin nature, the second that we reach out to God and we say we want to be whole, he's right there ready to accept us. And that doesn't mean that, all of our things are just going to, like, every one of our wishes is just going to happen, or all of our dreams are just going to automatically succeed. That's not what that means. It just means that God will pursue wholeness with us and allow us to pursue that and walk in that. And so Matthew, as he's going through this, or Mary, as she was going through it in season 1 and season 2, she's really struggling with all these different things that were happening. And so, like, she is pursuing that wholeness after episode 1 of season 1. And so she begins to go through that. So when she has her moment of relapse, she knows that she needs to go back to the group and she needs to pursue Jesus, and she's willing to accept even his forgiveness in that. And so Matthew is going through the same thing now, where he has not been fully restored. I have a note that I wrote down while I was watching this episode, and it says, Matthew was accepted and then he was called, but not until this moment truly was he restored. And so we see that that sanctification journey for Matthew as, yes, he was called and he was accepted and he was saved, but as he keeps on going through this, he wasn't fully restored, and he's going to keep on being restored as a human as he walks through his life, just like I'm being restored now. There's no way that I can be fully perfect and whole and all of that, right? Because I'm human. That's how God created me. I am a broken individual, and I have a sin nature, and all of that is hindering me in a lot of ways. But as we pursue that wholeness is when God begins to work and he begins to do these things. And so definitely Mary is correct here.
We're invited into redemption. I know I was. I know you were.
And that's even calling back to the parable that we read earlier with Andrew and Philip, right? That parable talks all about how everyone is invited. And so even Mary is saying here, then you're invited into that redemption. You're invited into that banquet.
I don't know what to say.
Maybe don't say anything. I know you have felt unworthy. Matthew, I know you felt unworthy.
And how does she know this? Because she recognizes it in herself and she sees it in him. She has felt unworthy. She still feels unworthy, and she's struggling with that now in her sanctification journey. And so Matthew is now, she sees that so clearly in him. But I love this moment that they have, this intimate moment. And I love the way that they did this, by the way, as well. This isn't like in a private room. This is kind of in an open room where anybody could walk by. It's open. So it's not this like weird moment. It might have still been weird in Jewish culture back then. But this, I think, is an amazing moment between these two people who we know are going to have feelings for each other, or do kind of have feelings for each other. And so it's not, it's not totally restrictive or restricted from the Jewish sense of them like being in a room alone, but it's also not them, in the midst of everybody. It's kind of this intimate moment. So I think it's a good middle ground here.
But it's time to add a new accessory to your clothes. Or rather, an old one. Shalom, shalom, Matthew.
Shalom, shalom, Betty.
Now we talk about this in another portion of the episode, and I'm going to fast forward to a different portion of this. But we see that shalom, shalom talks about perfect peace. Shalom is peace, right? And so shalom, shalom is perfect peace. It's like God's peace. It's just being whole. And so we talk about that at another point as well. But we fast forward. We see as Matthew actually gets some help kind of putting on his tzitzit for the first time, since he doesn't really know how to do it. And so this is an interesting moment as well.
Especially to have them on before Rabbi arrives?
Yes. Just tell me how to tie them.
It would be faster if I just do it for you.
Oh, I don't like to be touched.
Thank you. No problem. So, first you have to pull your, it's easiest if you take your outer tunic off first.
Off?
Yeah, I mean, you have your talit katan on underneath, right? That's where you attach them.
So the talid is something that you wear underneath your clothing. It's kind of like undergarments, and that is where you attach the tzitzit to, and this kind of forms the whole garment that you would use. That's why the tzitzit at the bottom are called the hem of the garment, or the edge of the garment. And so that's why we saw in episode 5, as the bleeding woman touches the hem of the garment, she touches the tzitzit, which is, kind of a interchangeable thing there. And so we see as Matthew is getting very uncomfortable. This is one of the funniest scenes I think I've ever seen in The Chosen. Really, really good.
Could you please turn around?
Oh, sure thing.
Why do we wear these anyway?
Giovanni did an amazing job on this portion of it, by the way. I love the way that he acts throughout this, and that there's no music and no weird corny sound effects or anything. I love this portion.
God commanded it in the law of Moses.
But what do tassels have to do with Torah?
Well, the Hebrew letters that spell the word are the numerical value of 600. Plus there are 13 knots and threads used to make the tassels.
And there are 613 commandments in the law.
See? Got it.
Yeah. So the Old Testament, there's 613 laws, right, in the law of Moses. And so this is the way that I remember this is actually in pomegranates. The average number of seeds in a pomegranate is 613. How cool is that? So that's how I actually remember 613 laws from the Old Testament. But that's what the tzitzit signify. They signify 600. The letters that are spelled out equal 600, and then the 13 knots and threads equal 613. It equals the law.
613. When we wear them on the four corners of our garments, it's like
being surrounded by God's word all day.
See, you're practically a rabbi already. Oh, sorry. Okay, so on the bottom right corner of the talit, there should be a hole there.
Oh yes, I see it.
Okay, you take 3 short strings and 1 long string.
The blue one?
Yes, the blue one is longest.
Okay. He's here. Nathaniel, we will be there in a moment.
It's so funny to me, dude. I think they did such a great job, like just showing the humanity in this scene. Really, really good.
Thaddeus, what are you looking at?
I promise we'll be in shortly.
I love that portion right there.
You okay?
Just, he's just so rude sometimes.
It's almost like a moment from Thaddeus of like, I cannot believe this is actually happening right now. Really, really well done. Giovanni, amazing acting at that moment. That was probably one of your best moments ever that I've seen. Really, really amazing. There's a lot to talk about in this section here. Matthew is coming back to being fully Jewish, right? Like fully part of the group and of everything, right? But in that flashback, we see so many moments when this older Matthew is basically portraying, like Christ does in a lot of ways. He's like, he's taking the debt of these other people and he's taking it upon himself. He's taking that burden upon himself. Not only that, but he's gifting his enemies. He's sharing with Matthew this gift of faith that God has asked him to and preparing him for this journey way down the line. This is a really interesting flashback, and I think the writing here was so amazing, adding in the shepherd from earlier on and having all of these things play out the way that they are. Having the shepherd be as old as he is, I think that really fits. Like I said, logically, I was having some issues with that earlier, but having him be at the very edge of his life would make a lot of sense there as he's talking to Matthew and kind of sharing his faith and doing that. One thing that the older Matthew really reminded me of is how we should be seen in the earth, in the world. We are in the world, but we're not of it. And so as Matthew and Gaius don't understand anything this guy is saying, and they don't fully comprehend any of the things that he's trying to communicate, that's how we should be a lot of times on earth. When we interact with people, they should ask us why we're acting the way that we're acting or why we're doing the things that we're doing. We should be so kind that it stands out to people. We should be so self-sacrificing that we should stand out to people, and people should ask us why we're doing what we're doing and what is impacting us so much that we would do this for someone else. This is a huge thing for Christians. And I think that oftentimes we miss the mark on this. But this is a great example of who we should be in the world, that we should be someone who is focused entirely on God, so much so that we give up our life, right, in order to take up what he wants us to have. And sometimes we just miss that a little bit. I think also just seeing Matthew finally accepting, trying to get rid of the shame and guilt that he has of being a tax collector and really moving past that. Remember, the saying for this season is not what we were. And so as Simon the Zealot last episode really is moving past his zealotness, now Matthew is really beginning to move past his tax collectorness. And so we're seeing that kind of play out. And in Scripture, oftentimes we see them labeled as Matthew the tax collector or Simon the Zealot. And so, those titles are going to stick with them forever. You don't, just because when you come to Christ, you're whole and you're new, it doesn't mean that all of your past leaves consequences at the door. Those things are still going to affect what you do in the future and who you are in the future and the consequences of things that are going to catch up to you, right? If you were a thief and a criminal and a murderer, it doesn't mean that you don't go to jail just because you become a Christian. It means that in jail, you're going to serve God's purposes in whatever way he asks you to. And so there's a big difference in the way that we think about that. And just like we say all the time on this channel, following Jesus is better, but it's not easy. And so as we think about that, Matthew's journey is a lot like ours, and seeing that older Matthew really put in perspective how we should be seen. People need to see us in a way that is different than the world, and we need to be acknowledged in that way. We can't look exactly like the world looks, otherwise I don't think that we're doing our job correctly as Christians. All right, very cool section. What did you guys think about the Matthew Mary section? I really thought it was really well done and really well written. This episode as a whole, I wish that I could have seen it in theaters because it's very cinematic. It's very it is the most like an actual movie that I've seen of The Chosen so far. Really, really well written. The storylines that go throughout it are really well done. And so I think everything fits in a way that is different than a lot of the rest of The Chosen has felt so far, especially season 3. Season 3 has felt a little bit disjointed in some spots. And here we're really seeing as everything is firing on all cylinders, and it's really getting set up for episode 8. So, yeah, a very, very good episode overall. Let's jump over to, let's do a smaller one. Let's jump over to Shmuel, who is finally in this episode. We saw him one other time in this season, but we haven't seen much of him at all. And so seeing a little bit of Shmuel here is always good. Getting a little bit of a insight into who he is and what's going on there. Now, we saw the behind the scenes for this portion of the episode a long time ago as they were filming it. We saw that Shmuel was meeting with certain different people. One of them was this guy that we're going to see here. The other one is Nishan, which is actually going to be coming up, it looks like, in episode 8. And so really going to be cool to see that as well. All right, let's jump in and starting a new one right here. Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity, and today we're talking about The Chosen, Season 3, Episode 7. Really an amazing episode. I was really excited about this one. I was worried that it would turn out to be more of a setup episode, which it was, but at the same time, they gave us so much information in this episode that it really didn't feel boring or slow in any way. And so now we're going to check out a small scene with Shmuel, who we haven't really seen much of at all this season. He's had a couple of lines back in the Jerusalem Sanhedrin, and now we're going to see him in the temple, which is really, really cool to see. He's still in Jerusalem. He's still doing studying, and he's trying to pursue Jesus and figure out what's going on there. Remember, they have this edict now to kind of pursue anybody that's claiming to be the Son of Man. But really, Shmuel is really hyper-focused on Jesus and trying to get him taken out, basically. Not killed yet, but really they want to detain him. They want to get him away from preaching what he's preaching. They want to stop him from doing what he's doing. And so we see Shmuel here as he's pursuing that yet again. Now, we know from the trailer and different things that we're going to definitely see Shmuel in episode 8. And so I'm excited to see how that all plays out because I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, it's going to be really, really cool. So let's see what happens here.
Sent by God. Those were his exact words.
Yes.
Parentage?
He claimed to be of the house and lineage of David.
No, I mean his father's house. Jesus, son of whom?
Oh, he didn't say.
Origin.
What do you mean?
From whence he hails. Jesus of what?
Oh, I didn't ask him.
You just gave him the money?
Yes.
My sympathy for your loss is dwindling.
His preaching was powerful, like nothing I've heard before.
Did he perform any signs or miracles?
No.
Was he surrounded by loyal followers?
He was alone. He said he's going to build an army outside Beersheba in the Negev. And though I'm clearly too old to fight, a 50 shekel donation will help his troops craft weapons.
So this would have been a very common thing during the time of Jesus. And even now, we're seeing plenty of people who are claiming to be the Messiah in Jewish culture. And sometimes they actually amass quite a big following. Obviously, that turns out to not be the case. And so even during this time, there would have been imposters that would have claimed to be the Messiah, either one maliciously to kind of gain wealth and power and recognition, or because they were just very confused and they thought that they were the Messiah. So Jesus here is obviously the real Messiah, but there is other Jesus characters around the place, and they're not stealing his name. Jesus is just a very common name during this time. Just like we talked about before, there's very few names that would have been used during this time, and his name wouldn't actually have been Jesus. It would have been Yeshua, right? Which we know would have been the actual name that he would have gone by. but we call him Jesus nowadays, at least in the English language. So we see this here as he's meeting with this guy, and he's trying to decipher, is this the Jesus that I know, or is this some other random guy? And as the conversation goes, through every question, Shmuel is like, yeah, this guy's not it. It's not him. It's not him. It's not him. And so he finally kind of gets up and talks at the end here.
Thank you for your report.
You're not going to open a formal inquiry?
There are countless such con men swindling people all over Judea, and Jesus is a common name in our nation. If we started an inquiry, where would we stop?
But you seemed eager to accept an audience with me.
This is not the swindler I'm looking for.
Oh, now you make it sound like it is my fault. I was defrauded.
I am sorry. You're free to go.
That's pretty much it for this scene. But we see as Shmuel is really, really seeking out this Jesus character, that he wants to know more about what's going on, and he wants to catch him really in the act. And then we see Atticus actually in Jerusalem as well, as he is actually in the temple area, which is really crazy. This is something that I wasn't expecting to see, but let's stick on Shmuel for now. So Shmuel, I'm expecting to see him approach Jesus in the season finale. Now we know that that's going to happen because we saw it in the trailer, but also, I'm really excited to kind of see where he's going to land overall. Like, what is Jesus going to be doing, and how does he talk to Shmuel? Where does Shmuel land at the end of the season? I don't think that Shmuel is going to become a follower. I don't think that Shmuel is going to become a believer at any point, unless he turns out to be like Paul or something, which would be really strange to me. Not strange, but it could happen, but I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that every single antagonist is going to come to belief in Jesus. It's just not realistic, and so I don't think the Chosen would write it that way. I think Shmuel is going to continue to be an antagonist. Obviously, Caiaphas is going to come in at some point. Obviously, now we have Pilate, who's another player in all of this. So everything is kind of starting to flesh out. Now, we know that in the next episode, because we've seen the behind the scenes, we know that Nishan is going to come and play a bigger part. He's going to have a scene with Atticus. He's going to have a scene with Shmuel, and he's going to be the one that actually leads them to Jesus. When he's finishing the feeding the 5,000 is what I think. So it's going to be cool to see that. I'm excited to see the progression of Shmuel. We haven't seen much of Yanni at all in this season, so I wonder if we'll see more of him or if he's going to be a very small part. Both of them are kind of small parts in this season overall. I wonder if we'll just see more of them next season or what's going to happen. I don't know. I don't have a full perspective on all of that. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about what's upcoming and what's going to happen in terms of these antagonists kind of coming in. It's going to be exciting to see. So yeah, let me know. Awesome. Very cool. I'm going to stand up for just a second so I can stretch and we'll get right back to it. Got to keep that blood moving, Sometimes long streams are a little bit hard, but you got to do what you got to do. So let's go on to the next section, and that is going to be a big one, which is the Simon and Gaius storyline. And so this is the last kind of major section in this episode. This was really interesting, and so let's dive into this. There's a lot of things that get revealed here, and we see more and more of it. So let me get to the right point, and then we'll start this one. Here we go. Let's see. Actually, let me do a little bit of what am I thinking of? Translation here, because I want to have this ready. see. Sorry, I'm trying to look at something. I'm not trying to ignore you. 2 minutes ago. Okay, so this is this phrase. So let me pull this up real fast. Okay, so this is an actual phrase that they took from somewhere else. That's really interesting, actually. Interesting. Okay. All right. As we start this out, I'll talk about that, and we'll go through it. Here we go. All right. We'll start this one up. Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity. And as always, we're continuing on with all of our episodes from all of our videos from episode 7, all of our breakdowns here. And this one's an actual really interesting one. I'm excited to see how Simon's storyline is going to play out, Simon and Eden, and of course Gaius is always mixed into this. And so really we're seeing Simon and Gaius play off of each other a lot in this episode, and so we're going to go through their scenes and see where they line up. This actually begins in a really interesting spot here, because Simon is going into the Roman section of Capernaum and he kind of gets lost. I think in my mind he's probably looking for Gaius, looking for some advice and looking for some help, someone that he's been leaning on through this whole process with Eden. And so while he doesn't actually tell him what's going on, I think that maybe he is subconsciously searching out for him, but who knows. I wanted to pause it here at the very beginning because this phrase, I just looked it up, is actually like it's like like graffiti, basically, in the Roman section of town. And so this is actually a phrase that actually existed during that time. It's not just a random thing that the Chosen came up with. And so it says this, it says, if only similar swindling would dupe you, innkeeper, you sell water and drink the undiluted wine yourself. So this is like an insult to the Romans in a way. So either a Jew or someone came in here and kind of wrote this on the wall, at least is my guess here of how they're kind of portraying that. But it is interesting that they leave this. And this is one of the things I love about this show, is that they'll put up something like this and they won't translate it for you. They'll put up and they'll like talk about different things. Like in this episode, we get certain moments where they don't translate the Hebrew, right? And so when that happens, it kind of forces you to look up these things and to kind of see more, cultural significance of what's happening. The reason why Jews aren't allowed in here, because they do things like this. They would vandalize the Roman section. They would, they were lower class, so the Romans didn't want them here anyway. But they would also do these things because they're under the occupation of Rome. They would do things to hurt the Roman society. So this is kind of an insult that's on the wall. It's like graffiti. But it's an interesting way to open up this section with Simon, because it shows immediately kind of what Simon is walking into here. And obviously we see as he's in a Roman section here. So we see him walk in. He looks at that graffiti on the wall. He looks around. And the first thing they show us is a woman. Why do they do that? Because her hair is uncovered. She's obviously wearing Roman dress. This is immediately to tell us where he is and what he's doing. So he's in the Roman section. He's not supposed to be here. We know that. And she's kind of looking down on him. Again, another cinematography moment for us to be shown like, oh, he's lesser than, right? The Romans believe they are higher. And so this is a very clear like image of, hey, we're in the Roman section. We're not dealing with Jews right now. Again, we're seeing more white actors, more Roman-looking actors. I think this guy to the left looks like the most Roman person I've ever seen in my life. His face, he has like that long face like Romans had, yeah.
You have to have guts for that. What are you doing here, Jew?
I was just walking and I ended up.
You don't just end up in the Roman quarter. How did you get past the guard?
I didn't see it.
You're coming with me.
He's in big trouble now. But remember the end of last episode, episode 6, we end the episode with Simon saying, why? And Eden says, you're asking the wrong person. So he's really searching for answers and trying to figure this out. But he also he hasn't gone to Jesus yet, right? And he's kind of not been there yet. So he's not pursuing answers necessarily, but he's trying to figure this out on his own, which is obviously the wrong thing. You should never do that. You should always go to Jesus. You should always ask him for help. But Simon is trying to be a big, strong man. He's trying to figure this out on his own. He's very angry, and a lot of people can see that around him. He's also shunning all of his friends. He hasn't had a single scene with any of his friends or family or even Eden yet throughout this episode. And so, this is a hard one for him, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. So in his days, in his, just fog of his mind, he's walking around and he's walked into the Roman section, which is not always the best case. So
Yes. What's going on?
This Jew somehow got past the gate.
I'll handle it.
we can see the difference here too between Gaius and the other Roman soldiers. Gaius is a primi ordine. What does that mean? It means that he is in charge of a ton of Roman soldiers. I think close to like 1,000 Roman soldiers or something like that. He's in charge of a lot of different people. So he is a centurion of centurions. So he is in charge of a bunch of other centurions that have Roman soldiers that they are all in charge of. So he is a very, very prominent leader now in Capernaum, especially now that Quintus kind of promoted him in season 2. I think it was. Was it season 2 or season 1 that he got promoted? It was season 1, wasn't it? Yeah. Season 1, he got promoted. So, yeah, big deal.
Are you sure? He's nobody.
Go to the entrance and make sure Antiochus is posted there. This never should have happened. I want to know where he was.
Yes, Prim.
Again, he calls him Primi there, Primi Ordine.
Don't talk and ask questions. Do not make a sound until you get inside.
So here we're actually seeing Gaius's home. This is really interesting because this shows us a lot of different things. If we look over to the left over here, we actually see a mural, and let me move my face real fast, and I can show you that a little bit better. If we look over here, we actually see a mural that has, basically a Roman god on it. And we actually see this, I think it's this god that we see, this is probably Poseidon, it looks like, from what I'm seeing. It looks like we have those seahorse-like creatures that Poseidon always rides, and his daughters, the sirens, are kind of all over the place. So that may be what this is here on the wall, is a mural of that. But we also see other things in his house that we're going to see in a second, which is a very, very big deal and kind of shows his Romanness. Because remember, Gaius is not Jewish. He is not, in any way kind of related to this whole Jesus thing. And so we're seeing the real, authentic view of who Rome was and what these Roman people actually did and what they had in their houses and all of that stuff. So it's going to be really cool to see more of this as we go through.
You could have been arrested. What possessed you to cross into our quarter?
I'd gone everywhere else. This was the last part of town I thought could distract me, The novelty of it.
You couldn't drink yourself into distraction
So let's go back. He says the novelty of it. The reason that he says that is as we look through, we see this. Now, this over to the right is a shrine of some sort. But who is it a shrine of? Well, it looks to be the shrine of an emperor. It's not Zeus. It doesn't look like any of those other gods or goddesses that we see, but it looks like this is a shrine to the emperor, which was a very common thing. Emperor worship was basically demanded in Rome, and they had to worship the emperor as if he were a god. And so Gaius has this shrine in his house, like it's a total normal thing. And Peter is kind of like amused by it, knowing that he follows the true God. It's amusing to see these things and obviously he wouldn't have it in his house, but to see Gaius kind of play this role of Roman and who he is as a real person, it's an interesting thing for Simon to see at first. Again, we see a better look at that mural. Definitely looks like, obviously, some sort of god or goddess, some sort of god in Roman mythology, and he's got those horses, so it kind of looks like Poseidon, but could be something else that I'm not familiar with either.
You could have been arrested. What possessed you to cross into our quarter?
I'd gone everywhere else. This was the last part of town I thought could distract me, you know? The novelty of it.
You couldn't drink yourself into distraction at the Hammer?
What is this?
And here we meet Gaius's wife and his son for the first time. Very cool to see this as well.
It's nothing to worry about, Livia.
But it's not yet the end of the day.
I needed a private place to interrogate this Jew who was trespassing.
I mean no harm.
Are you the doctor?
The what?
Gaius said there was a Jewish doctor or something that might be able
Livia, please furnish this man with one of my cloaks. I don't want any more trouble while I see him out of the quarter.
Simon immediately starts to pick up on this. So his wife is saying, are you the Jewish doctor? Who she's talking about is Jesus, right? Not any normal doctor. Because Gaius has obviously been coming home and talking about how this is someone who maybe could heal. And so let's see why she's talking about that.
Do you know the Jewish doctor? Can he help Ivo?
Simon, this is my son, Marius, and Ivo is our...
Yeah, you mentioned, the son of your servant.
He's my best friend. He's really sick.
All right, Marius, that's enough.
So we're seeing more of this play out. Obviously, we've definitely confirmed now that Gaius is the centurion with the sick servant, right? Now we're seeing his family. His son is calling him his best friend, and the mother obviously seems to have some issues here, and she's going through some stuff, as we're going to see in a little bit. But she gets Simon a cloak so that he can sneak out of here, and Gaius is very, very coy about this whole thing. He's very, very... nervous kind of having Simon here and seeing this whole thing, and he doesn't want Simon to see this side of him. He doesn't want to be that vulnerable to him because he doesn't trust him that much yet, right?
Let's go to your room.
Jewishness isn't contagious, Livia.
Jewishness isn't contagious, Olivia. That's so funny because it kind of is, right? Like, not necessarily the Jewishness of it, but the belief in the Messiah kind of is, right? And so now Gaius she's starting to see this change in Gaius and who he's becoming. And he's saying Jewishness is not contagious. And she's kind of second guessing that because she's obviously seeing the change in him. That's super interesting.
So, he already knows our whole story?
Not all of it. We'll take the back door into the alley and sneak you out a side entrance.
So he already knows our whole story, not all of it. We are going to see a little bit more of the story, at least, in a bit here.
This way.
Super awkward. And then right here, the reveal of the other son, Ivo, who we saw in the trailer for season 3. We knew that Gaius was going to be here with him, but now we're actually seeing him in the bed. They are sick. The servant that's sick. Yeah, there he is. We'll move past that. Obviously, seeing more of who Gaius is a major, major thing for us. We've been guessing for a long time that Gaius is the centurion with a sick servant. We've pretty much all guaranteed that right now, right? That's the case. And I'm excited to see more of this development. Now, this next scene, I was not expecting at all. So let's check this out and see where this kind of goes off the rails a little bit. Really, really crazy storytelling here, but very logical in many ways as well, as we find out more about who this servant actually is to Gaius and how it all came about.
Put your hood up. The next time you need to change your scenery, try a new food, okay? teach yourself discus throwing.
Discus? It seems like you might be the one who needs the distraction.
Listen, I am going out of my way to help you.
Oh. I'm a fisherman. I can tell when a ship has run aground. How long has it been like this?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do. That boy.
It's none of your business.
Your wife asked if I was the Jewish doctor you told her about. What? You told her about Jesus?
There it is. So Simon's starting to pick up on it. He's starting to like get into this and see, oh, Gaius, are you interested in this? Like
I mean, the boy's been sick for almost a month, and he's getting worse every day.
None of your doctors can help?
You saw the color of his skin. They think less of him because he's a servant.
What? It's honorable you kept him on when his mother died.
He's not just a servant.
Yeah, your son said they were best friends. It's like having a brother. I understand.
They are. Half brothers.
that face right here is so funny to me. This face.
Not just a servant.
Yeah, your son said they were best friends. It's like having a brother. I understand.
They are.
That face is like, oh gosh, I messed up and now I gotta tell you. So this kid is Gaius's son. So he has two half sons here. Well, he had two sons of his, obviously, but they're half brothers. And so one of them is him and his wife that we have now, and one of them is from a servant that they had before. Now, this brings to question: did the mother actually die from childbirth, or did she die from, like something else? Like maybe she got taken away or something else because of Gaius's relationship with her. I'm pretty sure she did just die from childbirth or whatever else happened there. But yeah, this brings in so many questions. Obviously, it brings in the Romanness of Gaius as a whole. This is a more common thing in Roman society, for sure. There was a lot of promiscuity, a lot of different things, homosexuality, or, different things that happened in the Roman Empire. And so there's a lot of this kind of going on. I mean, if we look at places like, like Pompeii, you can see the culture during that period where, it was very sexualized and a lot of different things were happening there. And so for Gaius to have this, it's not uncommon. And especially, someone that's coming from a religious platform where this is very accepted and normalized in a lot of ways. And so, of course, this would be a very normal thing for Gaius, but he's starting to realize some of these other things that are coming into play and how he might be at fault here. Obviously, it's still going to create turmoil. You can't just live in that life and everybody's cool with it and everybody's okay. When you start walking in that, there's always things that fall apart. When you have two wives or these different things happen, there's always things that fall apart and hard things start to happen. Arguments become even more intense, and eventually there's going to become jealousy and different things that come into play. And so, of course, it's going to end up falling apart eventually.
Half brothers.
Does she know?
We don't talk about it. For Roman men, it is a more common thing.
So she knows, but they don't talk about it. And he's making the excuse, it's a more common thing.
Common for lots of men. It's more accepted in your culture.
Just spare me the sermon, okay?
I'm not judging.
I did.
Again, Gaius isn't Jewish, right? Why isn't Simon condemning him and telling him that he's wrong? Because Gaius isn't Jewish. He's not a follower of Christ. He is a non-believer at this moment. And so as we look at Simon, like he's not in the position to correct him. They're not friends, right? They're not brothers in Christ. They're not followers of Jesus together. So it's a completely different thing. It's like if I ran into, some store and was like yelling at someone for cheating on their wife or something. Like, I would have no place to do that, right? Unless they were my brother and sister in Christ, and I had the ability to kind of talk to them through that and walk with them through the process. It's completely different here. Simon doesn't have that right, and Gaius is not a follower or a believer, so it's a totally different thing here.
Not feel guilty about it at the time, but lately I do regret my actions, and now he's sick, and I can no longer pretend that he's not my son, and neither can she.
Silence between a husband and wife, it's poison. The longer you don't say something, the worse it gets, trust me.
Yeah, trust me. Simon's going through that right now, right? Eden was quiet for the longest time as he got home. And so now it's created even more issues than if she had just opened up right when he got home. And of course, we've talked about this a lot. Both Simon and Eden did things wrong in this, but Simon didn't have the information needed in order to deal with the situation at all. And so now he's overwhelmed with emotion. Not only did this bad thing happen to Eden with the miscarriage, but also his wife like kind of lied to him and let him off on the hook and let him think that he was doing all these things wrong, when in actuality that was not the case. And so, yeah, there's some hard stuff to go through here.
I do not. You trust me enough.
Just stick to your side of the street, Simon.
Fine. Shalom, shalom, guys.
Why do you say it twice?
Well, once means peace. Twice means perfect peace. Complete wholeness.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be the day.
Both of them are longing for this wholeness. So like Simon's saying, shalom, shalom means perfect peace. It means wholeness. And that's what Christ is bringing. He is bringing perfect peace. He didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And that sword is going to bring perfect peace to all of us, right? At some point. And so that is what Christ is trying to achieve. He's trying to achieve this wholeness, not just within ourselves, but with God, so that we can again be walking with him and listening to him and obeying him, and really ordering the relationship that God created everything to have in the first place. And so Gaius, subconsciously, he wants that as well. He wants to be whole. He wants that perfect peace. And he says that will be the day. And he's longing for that. He's longing for the day when he's not fighting against Quintus and wanting to help these people, when he's not, having this son who is sick and in need of something to help him. And so here we're seeing as all these things are happening, but Simon can't even get to the point where he's like, okay, go to Jesus then, because he knows that Gaius, one, is not a believer, but two, he's dealing with his own stuff right now. Just like Eden was in episode 4 when she met Veronica. She could have said, oh, you can come to Jesus right now. He's at my house. But she didn't. She didn't do that because she's stuck in her own stuff, and she was letting all of that distract her from bringing people to Jesus in the first place. Really, really difficult when you're drowning in your own kind of grief and sorrow and sin to bring other people into Jesus, right? So obviously that's kind of what Simon's going through here. It is really interesting to see the Roman culture and more of Roman society kind of bleed into someone that we now care about in Gaius. We've cared about Gaius since season 1, and so now we're seeing more of who he is and seeing the sinful nature of the Roman people kind of lived out in him rather than someone that we dislike, like Pilate or Quintus. And so it's harder kind of seeing that. So again, the writing is impeccable here. Really, really well done with Gaius. And interesting to see how he's going to transform from coming from this person who is a non-believer and, sleeping with his servant and having this child to then eventually being the person who has more faith than anybody in Israel. That's how we're going to see it, at least in Scripture. That's how it's phrased. This centurion this centurion sends someone to Jesus in order to say, "Hey, I know that you can heal my servant, even if you're far away. Even you don't even have to come to my house. I know if you say it, it'll be done." And Jesus says, not in all of Israel have I seen faith like this. And so even more than the apostles, even more than anybody else, he has faith. And we're starting to see that build a little bit in Gaius, but not obviously a ton. So I'm excited to see where that lands with him, and what happens as we see further seasons, because I don't think that his servant's going to be healed this season. I think it'll probably be next season when his servant is healed, but we're seeing the setup for that here. And I wonder how that relationship with his wife is going to be. All of that is really something that could be delved into in the future. So I'm interested to see that. Alrighty, very cool. Simon and Gaius, huge storyline. I'm excited for them. I'm excited to see what's happening there. Let's see here. We've got a few more things to go through, and then we'll be done. But a lot of stuff in this episode, and I've heard that the theatrical release of season 3 finale was like 3 hours. So episode 8 is going to be like over an hour and a half or something. Really going to be a long one. So I'm excited for that. That means that there's a lot of stuff they could pack into it. So that's really, really good. Yeah. Very cool. Let's go through 2 more things. Let's go through this section with John and Simon. So first off, let's start with Jesus talking to John. And then we'll jump to John and Simon. Here we go. Alrighty, right there. Let me see, make sure that's good.
It's not too bad. We're having in the same place. Oh, okay. I know.
All right, cool. Alrighty, let's start another one. Here we go. Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity. And today we're going to be looking at The Chosen, Season 3, Episode 7. This was one of my favorite episodes, if not my favorite episode from the season so far, just in the way that it looked and the storytelling that was in this one. I know there wasn't like these major miracles that happened or any like insane biblical moments, but it was very, very well done. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into this one. Let's talk about John in this specific section. Let's break down the pieces where he talks to Jesus and then with Simon. Obviously, this is one of the most impactful emotional moments of the episode here, but I love how he actually is angry when Jesus asks him to do these things, because not often do we actually go into obedience with Jesus in a happy way. Not often are we like, oh yeah, I really want to do that. Oh yeah, I really want to work out every day and eat the right stuff and make sure that I have a healthy body. Not, I really want to, do all these things that I know are going to be better for me that I don't do because I'm just lazy or selfish or prideful or whatever. And so oftentimes we fall into those traps, and here John is doing the same thing. So I love to see that from him. And then he sees the outcome later on, and he's like, oh, this is why Jesus asked me to be a part of this. So let's jump in and let's talk about what this true friendship kind of looks like here, and obedience to Christ looks like as we look at John here. So let's jump in.
John, may I have a word? Yes, Rabbi. I can do that. This isn't going to be easy.
I'm sorry?
The Decapolis will be perilous. The hearts I must reach there are hard, Jew and Gentile alike. Our time will be fraught.
We are ready for anything, Master. We have Z. I can ask my father to come along for extra help. He's good with crowds.
I want you to stay behind.
It's funny to me that John's ego is still as big as it is. Like, Jesus tells him all this stuff is happening, and John's like, oh, I can fix that. I'll ask my dad to come along. We'll fix it. No problem. Like, his ego is so big that he thinks that Jesus is asking him like to help in this moment in this way. It's interesting because we're seeing John struggle with that throughout these seasons here. He's really going to come to the point later when he is really a servant to Christ. But right now, he's still kind of like this ego-led kind of youngster in a lot of ways. He's like this young, boisterous man who's trying to get things done, right, and trying to be the best. And Jesus telling him that he's beloved and all this stuff is kind of building up that ego. But in these moments here, Jesus is really refining him, and I love to see that.
The rest of us will leave in the morning. You will stay and wait.
You just said the situation was fraught, which means I should be there more than ever.
For what? Strength in numbers? Our challenge is there. are not based on how many followers are surrounding me. This is not about the lack of resources.
Well, then what?
Hard hearts, John. Cold, unyielding granite.
I don't understand.
You seem to think that we needed a full group for this trip, hmm? Who was missing at today's meeting?
Oh.
You will stay and wait for him. The success of this trip depends on Simon.
Now, this is, again, an ego check for John. Jesus is saying the success of this trip depends on Simon. John expects that the success on most of these trips depends on him, right? It's an ego check for him.
Master, whatever it is you need, I can provide.
There you go. You see, he's expecting, hey, I can take care of this. Don't worry about Simon. I can be the key to this trip. Just tell me what to do.
Waiting for Simon is what I'm asking you to provide.
Simon is distracted. He's not himself. Something is off.
Simon's not as good as me. Something's off with him right now. I'm at my tip-top shape. I'm ready for the game. Bring me in. Put me in, coach.
Maybe it's better if he stays behind.
John, I love you. But that's not the approach I take to people in pain. You should know that by now.
What about one of the others? Wouldn't it be better if one of them...
You've known Simon since childhood.
What about Matthew? They were able to work together to find Mary in Jericho.
Did you think that pairing them up for that task was a good idea at the time?
This reminds me so much of Moses, right? Moses in the wilderness, as he sees the burning bush, what does he do? He talks to the burning bush and he says, but I'm not very good at this. I don't know how to talk very well, right? and God keeps on giving him these moments over and over again. And here we're seeing very similar things where it's like, I don't want to do this. Like, can't someone else do it? Like, like someone like Matthew was with him before. Couldn't you put Matthew to it? This reminds me so much of how I have acted in the past when God asks me to do certain things, and it's scary for me. I love to do the things that I feel like I'm equipped for, right? Like, I love doing these live streams and making these videos. I feel like I'm equipped to do that in a lot of ways, but when I was first coming into this, that would not have been the case at all, right? When God first asked me to step out 5 months ago and leave, the career that I had been in for 10 years of being a worship pastor, that to me was terrifying, right? And I don't know if I'm good at anything else. Like, music is all that I've known. And so that's kind of what John's doing here. He's afraid to step out into this, and he's offering any solution to get out of it because he feels uncomfortable with it, because he thinks that he deserves something else. He thinks that he deserves to be there right next to Jesus, helping him in everything that he's doing. And that's not what Jesus is asking him to do right now. And he doesn't know why, but he's going to find out later.
John, it has to be you. No more questions.
I love that. Love that so much. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here, and we'll get to a little funny section here, actually, that's really hilarious to me. And then we'll talk about the rest of it. So let me find the exact moment here so I don't miss it. So this is really funny because during filming, I think someone got sick with COVID maybe during filming. And so if we look at this, and you can see my cursor right, yeah. If we look right here, this is supposed to be Simon the Zealot. But there's like a stunt double here. And in this shot, like, it's just so hard to hide because you can just certainly tell that it's not him. And so they just got a guy that kind of vaguely looks like the rest of the disciples. Whenever this first came out, the behind the scenes of this section here, everybody everybody that is like detectives, like we are on this channel, they were like sending me pictures and like taking screenshots and like, who is this guy? Is this a new character? What's going on? But it just turns out that it's just a stunt double of who's supposed to be Simon the Zealot, I believe, in this scene here. And we're also missing John and Simon, obviously, because they're off on doing their own things. It's a really, really funny moment. I just wanted to point that out real fast. Let me get to the next section here. Super, super funny to me, though. All right, here we go. Let's jump in here.
Shalom, Simon.
What are you doing here?
Did you sleep in?
I didn't sleep at all.
Why?
Where's everyone?
They left before dawn for the Decapolis. No one.
So he just realizes that he's been left back behind, and he didn't get any sleep because he's still dealing with all this stuff. We don't even know if he's staying at Eden's house right now. Yeah, really interesting. I wonder what's going on with him and where he feels like he's at, but obviously very lost in terms of where the guys are, what they're doing in the mission of everything, because he's just so stuck in what he's dealing with right now. Now, the ladies have no idea kind of what's going on, although I think in episode 8, they're going to obviously get more of an insight into that.
Told you? If you run, you could probably catch up with him.
Not much of a runner.
Now, this is a really funny reference. If you actually read the Gospels, in the Gospel of John, it makes very clear to point out who got to the tomb first. So when Jesus is resurrected and the tomb is opened, of course, women are the first ones to see that that's the fact. But when they go back and they tell the other apostles what happened, they run to the tomb. And the two that are really running to the tomb are Simon Peter and John. and as they're running, John makes it very clear that John wins that race. And so throughout all of the Chosen, there's been these little funny moments of Peter kind of being bad at running, or that he's slower, or that he's not very good at running. And so that was a really, really funny jab there from Simon Peter.
Simon, what are you doing here?
I'm having a cup of water. I'm thirsty.
Why aren't you on your way with the others? Did they tell you to stay behind and look after the women?
I didn't know about the trip. I thought Andrew and Philip went and sorted it out.
You're disconnected, Simon. You have no clue what's going on.
You rebuke me, Zebedee?
Abba? Don't play games with me, kid. Salome and I were at your bris.
Abba.
I love Zebedee kind of going into dad mode there a little bit. He's like, listen, I know, I've been there since you were born, bro. Like, don't play games with me. Like, we were there, and he can tell that there's something wrong with Simon. So he's trying to get to the heart of him there, although John kind of steps in because Jesus asked him to have that role for Simon. So.
What's gotten into him?
What's gotten into? Just go get your things.
Even now, we can tell that John really does not want to be here, right? He really does not want to follow through with what Jesus has asked him to do, but he knows that he has to because he wants to be obedient, right?
Hi. I travel light. What are you doing here anyway?
I came here to wait for you.
Really?
Oh, believe me, it was not my choice. If it were up to me, I would have left you behind.
Oh, did someone eat your breakfast, John? What have I ever done to you?
It's what you haven't done.
This again?
You miss meetings? You hang around all night with a Roman official? Your wife doesn't even know where you are?
So leave me.
So he hasn't been home. He's been hanging out with Gaius all night and kind of walking around and doing his own thing. So his wife doesn't even know where he is.
Behind, like chaff in the wind.
I can't.
He's like, I would if I could, Simon.
Jesus said the success of this trip to the Decapolis depends on you. You, of all people. I don't understand it, and frankly, I feel disrespected by it.
And frankly, I feel disrespected. Again, it's this ego thing. John thinks that he should be the guy, but he's not. Simon Peter is the guy.
What am I going to say to Jesus, huh? No?
Yeah, you could.
You know I can't do that.
That's some doubt and disobedience a little bit, kind of flowing through Simon there.
Let's go.
He just angrily kisses the mezuzah. That's so funny to me. All right, we'll fast forward again. Get to this last scene here with Simon and John. Here we go. We see this portion here.
It's the time I can't miss.
You said you go with him to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, that doesn't mean every time he goes somewhere. And the Decapolis is hardly the ends of the earth.
I didn't say it was.
You know, I'm remembering something you told me in Samaria.
I prefer not to talk about Samaria, if that's okay with you.
That field he tricked you into cultivating for a Samaritan, to correct your prejudice.
It was not a trick. I'm not exactly fond of that memory, Simon.
Melech, with a broken leg. You said in the morning he was healed, but we were already at Fatina's house. Jesus didn't have to be present to perform the miracle.
What's your point?
But why can't he perform a miracle in the Decapolis from Capernaum instead of dragging us all into mostly Gentile territory that already has it out for us?
This has an undertone too, not only of the Decapolis, but also of Eden. If he could heal Melech from far away, why couldn't he heal Eden from far away? Why couldn't he have stopped that from happening? You know, so it's not just the undercurrent of, hey, he could help the Decapolis right now, but he's also building up to Eden here.
I'm sure he'd be more than willing to answer your question, since success depends on you being there.
Off it, he's nicer with you than with me. I don't hold that against you, do I?
Oh, how very generous of you. Any other virtues you'd like to lord over me? Simon the exceptional? Simon the distinct? And also, yes, maybe he calls me beloved sometimes, but that's only because you have Eden.
Again, the Gospel of John always refers to John as the beloved disciple. And so, yes, he calls me beloved sometimes, which is really funny. I love that. But John, again, it's this ego thing with him, and he's not looking past that to see the hurt of Simon. He hasn't even asked him kind of what's going on or how he can help or anything. John's really focused on himself until things kind of break here.
I don't know what you're whining about when you have found someone like her.
You can see this moment, it's kind of like awkward because you're not quite sure like what's going on here. You know that he's feeling sad, but he's not like outright crying. Remember, he's not like a girl, right? I know a lot of times, girls will kind of let their emotions flow, or they can't hold it in, so they let it out. Guys will oftentimes try to control their emotions, right? And so if I'm crying, I will stop for a second and try to recenter myself and stop myself from crying so that I can continue to communicate what I'm going to communicate, or, continue on with what I'm trying to do. So here we can see that Simon is trying to hold it in here. He's trying to stop it from happening. And he's trying to not show those emotions. He's trying to hold it in and deal with it himself like he has been for the last few days.
Look, I'm sorry. I went too far. I know I wouldn't want anybody to resent me for having a wife. Simon? Hey, Simon. Hey, I didn't mean anything by it. Simon, what did I say? Simon?
I trusted Jesus.
Of course you do. Wait. Trusted?
Yeah, quick question. You said trusted. That means past tense, right? You trusted Jesus. We can see this starting to deteriorate a little bit. Now we know from episode 8 that he has another conversation with John, or we know from the trailer from episode 8 that he has another conversation with John where he says, my faith isn't the problem. I think I was a mistake. And so it's not only deterioration of trust in Jesus, but it's also a deterioration in trust in himself, right? In faith in himself. And so he's really dealing with a lot of different things right now coming from this whole miscarriage thing.
I trusted that Eden would be okay. Safe while we were gone. I didn't know it, John. But before we all left on our 2x2 mission, we conceived a child. And while we were gone...
No. I'm so sorry, brother.
When it happened, she almost died along with the baby. There was so much damage, the doctor said she might never be able.
So we get more clarification here. Eden obviously has spent some time explaining to him exactly what happened. She almost died during the miscarriage. Not only did she almost die, but her insides are actually damaged to the point where they may not be able to ever have children ever. So that is heartbreaking. It's even more than just losing the baby, but it's losing the opportunity maybe for a future baby.
Tonight, Heaven. Why didn't you tell us?
Because I'm furious, John. I'm so angry. Look, he is who he says he is. I don't believe it. I know it. He's the first and the last. He can do anything.
This kind of harks back to the scripture talking about when Jesus asks Simon Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" Right? He knows who Jesus is, but the way that he replies during that scripture is like, well, some say you are this, and some say you are that. And he says, "No, Peter, who do you say that I am?" Right? And so that's kind of harking back to that as well. I wonder if that scene will come up in the future, and we'll see kind of a callback to here.
How could he let something like this
That's not the right way to think about
happen
it.
to Eden? Happen to me? Let's keep going.
You're not exempt, Simon. Remember, he said that in this world, bones will still break, hearts will still break, but he's making a way for people to access a better kingdom.
And that is a harken back to season 2, episode 1, with Melech, right? Like that same episode they keep on referring to. Again, that's true. Hearts will still break, bones will still break. Like the world is still broken, and Jesus didn't heal everybody that he came in contact with. I think of the example of the pool of Bethesda, right? There's so many people that he didn't heal there, but he did heal the one that he was there for. He didn't heal everybody at that pool. Why? Well, because he didn't, right? It's just what he chose to do. And that's the way that it is. We can't understand God's ways in its entirety. And so here, Simon is going through the same thing of, but why does it have to be me?
Heals total strangers while I gave up everything for him.
But that does not mean that your life will now be perfect. In fact, he said the complete opposite.
I don't want to talk about this anymore. Life was a whole lot easier when we fished.
That's so true, right? Like we talk about on this channel all the time. Following Jesus is better, not easy. It's not easier to follow Jesus. Sometimes it's way, way, way harder. But it is the way that it is. And through that hardship, we learn and we grow and we become closer with God. And here, Simon is experiencing that. He said it was way easier when we were just fishermen.
Could have lost a baby while you were a fisherman, Simon. We just wouldn't have anybody to turn to.
He could have prevented it, and he did not.
Sounds like we're close. He said, it all depends on you.
Here we go. Simon takes off, and that's basically the end of the episode here. But we see here, obviously, Simon's way faster than John, so maybe the whole running joke is just a lie, you know? And that's the end of the episode there. Wow. Yeah, John, being the friend that he is, he shows examples of being such a good friend. But before the point that he recognizes that Simon is actually in pain and he's hurting, he's not a very good friend. In fact, he's being a very, reluctant follower of Jesus in a lot of ways. And so, it's very hard for him to get to the point where he can actually be obedient and see what Christ had for him, had in store for him. And it's not just that he's going to be with Simon in this moment, but I believe this is going to continue into episode 8. Like I said, I haven't seen episode 8 yet, so I'm assuming we're going to see that kind of come into fruition there in episode 8, as we've seen little bits and pieces of that through the trailers and different things that are upcoming. yeah, I think this relationship is going to strengthen throughout time. Obviously, him and James, Peter and James and John are the three that are closest with Jesus. They're there for, you know, the biggest events of what Jesus does. And so to see that kind of form a little bit and those relationships and those bonds get closer is really cool. I'd love to see some of that between Simon and maybe Big James as well. It'll be cool to see. But yeah, really amazing section. Just seeing that reluctancy that John has, I think is so relatable to me. So yeah, excited to see more of it. All right, very cool. All right, we've got one last section that I want to do, and then we'll be done for the night. Again, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys being here. If you're watching this on Patreon or channel memberships later on, you guys are amazing, and you guys have really just done some, you know, you've changed our lives, really. You've honestly changed the way that I obviously live my life. Being in a totally new career has been massive for me in this last 5 months. And the last month, 2 months have been amazing. We've put out so many videos. You guys have been so gracious and amazing to sign up for Patreon to see these live streams and different things that we're putting out. I hope you're enjoying the Israel content that we're doing right now. There's so much of it that's still coming. We're just starting the beginning of our trip. So we've got a ton of Israel stuff to go through, a ton of Greece stuff to go through. So keep an eye out on all of that. And of course, we're going to have an amazing time doing all of that. So anyway, thank you guys so much. And let's continue on. Last thing we're going to do is the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to check out that scene and see how all of that plays out with Jesus and these other people that are coming up. And we meet some new characters. And it's a really cool scene here. So let's check it out and see how it's going. Yeah, right here. Alrighty. So here we go. Let's start another one. Welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity. And today we're going to be looking at another section of Season 3, Episode 7. And this one is all about the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000. We're seeing a lot of people start to gather around Jesus. All these different groups are beginning to form. And we know from the behind the scenes and the trailers and all the research that we've done that this is the beginning of that feeding of the 5,000. This is how everyone starts to gather and come together for this massive event. So let's jump in. Let's see how this is all happening and what happens to start this event in the first place. How Jesus begins to teach here before obviously multiplying the food and all of that. I think that's going to be in a while. We know that there's at least one night cycle in between now and the actual feeding of the 5,000. So I assume that the feeding of the 5,000 is actually going to be the next day. So he's going to teach all throughout the night, and then the next day is going to be the feeding of the 5,000, which is a really intense thing. But let's jump into it and see what's happening in this scene here as we see the very beginning. Here we go. So we're seeing this. This is a statue of, I think, Athena, who is obviously a Greek goddess. This is showing that there is pagan influences in this area of the Decapolis. So as they're traveling to the Decapolis, they're stopped in this area in which there is a deity here, right? Like an idol that is just out in the middle of the field. And this shrine is, stocked up with food and incense and all this different stuff, showing that they're actually actively worshiping at this site here. And this is, something that they would have done here. Now, I don't know if this is saying that the Hellenists are doing this. Hellenists that have, these are either Jews or other people that have accepted and adopted the ways of the Romans, or if this is a different group, Syrophoenicians, or different people that are worshiping at this, but it's obviously showing the impact of Rome and different cultures in this area in particular, showing that these are not, your traditional Jews, at least not all of them are, in this area. Now we see Leander. Oh, did I turn off the sound? Here we go. We see Leander here as well. He's kind of keeping a lookout. He's waiting for them to come because he's hoping that they'll come around the corner and that they'll start to arrive in this area, hoping that they'll come back. At least Philip and Andrew, but the rest of them are actually with them now as well. Now, originally it seems like they're just like out in the wilderness randomly here, but later on we see that there is a large, encampment behind them, actually where they're staying. We see Philip again. He's hurt. He's got a staff with him. Leander runs down.
Andrew, Philip. I knew you'd return.
Why are you acting like this?
There's so much unrest and anger. I don't want to draw attention to... you.
First time Leander actually meets Jesus. Remember, they haven't seen Jesus at all. They weren't there for the Sermon on the Mount. They haven't seen any of the miracles or anything. They're just hearing Philip and Andrew's words and seeing their miracles be done in the Decapolis and, well, not in the Decapolis, but in Nave, which is actually north of the Decapolis, east of the Sea of Galilee.
You must be the rabbi we've heard so much about.
More than heard about, as I understand. Rise. I'm sorry for the trouble.
No. The strife between Jew and Gentile was there all along in a billah, just simmering beneath the surface. It's simply out in the open now. It's bound to happen sooner or later.
It was bound to happen now.
Rabbi.
Now, we'll talk about this in a second, but something that is actually really interesting is the way that they got here. They actually walked on foot to the Decapolis. Now, being in Capernaum, it would make way more sense, and we see this way more often in Scripture, that they would take a boat from Capernaum across the Sea of Galilee down to the Decapolis. It makes way more sense. It would be way faster, at least in my mind, unless they just didn't have a boat at that time. I don't know. In this storyline, they may not have a boat because Zebedee sold his. I don't know if Simon and Andrew sold theirs. I don't know. Anyway, they may not have had a boat big enough or whatever, but it would make more sense in Scripture. Normally, they actually do take a boat from Capernaum to the other side or down to the Decapolis or to wherever they needed to go in that area. That's why they preached so much in that area. They could move to these different areas very quickly.
Jesus of Nazareth, your teachings have reached us.
So I have heard.
He has not.
What do you mean? He's deaf.
Ayaba cannot hear and can barely speak.
Telemachus, you are out of line. This is not why we need Jesus.
Why shouldn't it be?
Because, Rabbi, there are far greater problems right now than one man's ear.
I can think of no better place to start.
Didn't mean to spring this on you, I promise. I really didn't know.
Please, Rabbi. I don't mean to disrespect,
I understand, son.
Again, here we see another healing. This is another, amazing part of Jesus' ministry. This happened all the time. He would meet people and heal them and all of that. But there's a very clear command here as we go forward that he tells them, do not tell anybody, which is another big thing. I think Jesus is being very careful here to not escalate the power and everything to too many people at once, because he knows what the consequences are of that.
Be opened. Don't be afraid. That's what birds sound like. They sing.
I don't even hear them.
Abba, can you hear me?
The sound of your voice. The sound of my voice.
Remember, this is the first miracle that Leander has seen. All the rest of them have seen miracles before. Philip is actually a bit worried here. It looks like he's not too excited. He's actually worried.
Telemachus. Am I saying that right?
Yes, it's perfect.
Now, this kid's name is Marcus. An interesting thing that I've been actually thinking about is, could this possibly be Mark, like the gospel writer, the one that is kind of coming under Simon and is his apprentice in a lot of ways? I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. I do think the age is probably similar to what we would have seen from Mark, so that's possible. We just don't know. This could possibly be Mark, though, that they're setting up for later on, which would be crazy. It'd be really cool.
How do I know?
How can we ever repay you?
I have no money, no way to compensate.
Actually, you can.
How?
By telling no one what happened. I strictly charge you to keep this quiet, which should be easy for you. You've had quite a lot of practice. Now is not the time for this word to spread. Do you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Okay. That was kind of corny, but I get it. No, but I think Jesus is doing this here, like I said, because he doesn't want this word to spread too quickly. Remember what happens when Lazarus is resurrected? We see this in John 11. Everything escalates mega quick after that point. And so he doesn't want this fire to start too quickly. He wants the embers to start and the sparking to start, but he doesn't want it to just full, bonfire quite yet. He's trying to bide his time so that he can complete all these things that he wants to do while he's here on earth.
That's good. You brought friends. I thought we'd seen the last of you.
Now we get to see Nishan for the very first time. Now Nishan is a new antagonist in this season of The Chosen. He is a healer from the Decapolis. And we've seen actually a lot of the behind the scenes of who he is and kind of what he's all about. We actually know from one of the behind the scenes videos with The Chosen that he is going to go to Jerusalem and basically tattletale on Jesus and what's happening here. So this is probably how Shmuel gets to the feeding of the 5,000 altogether, is through Nishan telling him where Jesus is and kind of what's going on there. But we hear this is the first time that we actually get to see him and what he's all about. He's not very happy, obviously.
Nishan, they're here to bring peace. Nishan is a healer. Argo never had enough money for Nishan to heal him, though.
Here to bring peace? That's what they said the last time. You must be the rabbi, the one everyone's been talking so much about. Tell me, what sort of respectable rabbi would be speaking amicably with a man who corrupts our Hebrew children by teaching them Greek philosophy?
If this
So Leander may be a Greek philosopher, which is really interesting. And so Nishan is very much against Leander because he thinks that he is teaching all the children Greek philosophy and kind of converting them into Romans, into Greeks. That is really, really interesting. That's a great point. That's how they would have felt. So just like Shmuel, Nishan may not have a bad intention as an antagonist of Jesus, but rather he wants to preserve the Jewishness of the Jews. And that's, an honorable thing if you have that mindset that Jesus is not the Messiah. And so it's a completely different thing here.
If of children were to raise money for your fee, would you speak to him then?
He will never raise the money, I know that. You want to dilute our faith.
How do you know what he wants?
Argo. What did you just say? The town deaf mute?
He's not the town deaf mute anymore, Nishan.
So this is the weird thing about it to me, right? Like, Jesus just said, don't tell anybody. And then he speaks up, which again isn't necessarily telling someone, but then like the secret is out, right? Like immediately right after he says don't tell, it just immediately comes out, which happens oftentimes when Jesus says don't tell anybody, and then that person will run off and go tell everybody in the town. So yeah, quite interesting here.
Go on your way.
Who did it? I want to know who healed you.
Now he's not telling him that
Deafness
portion.
was no doubt punishment for some ghastly sin committed by you or your parents. And I want to know who.
It doesn't work that way.
Oh, then how does it work?
This is a great shot there, actually. We see Andrew finally getting a little bit anxious. We see him have almost the same face that he had in season 2, episode 7. Remember when he saw the Romans coming on the boat? When he was on the boat with Simon? It's almost that same face. And he sees all of these people over the hill as Philip's kind of hobbling up.
What is it?
Huge refugee camp. Now, we saw portions of this camp at the Feeding of the 5,000. This was actually a really cool setup that they had.
Ho ho! What have we here? The Galileans return, this time in droves.
A drove is a flock or herd of animals.
Oh, I know.
They're Syrophoenicians.
So these are the Syrophoenicians. So we were actually right about that point when we had our guesses earlier on. But yeah, Syrophoenicians here.
My friends, you seem upset. How can I help you?
Are you the one they called Jesus of Nazareth?
I am.
They say you do miracles. All we've heard is rumors and heresy from the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Show us proof of who you are. Give us a sign. Or at least some food and supplies for all the people displaced from their homes.
So because of the chaos in the Decapolis, a lot of these people have been displaced, and now they're in these refugee camps because they have to leave the violence of the cities. So these are the Syrophoenicians. This is representative of a specific group that has been displaced.
Otherwise, take yourself, your followers, and your monotheism back west where you belong!
I love how they use the word monotheism. It just seems so out of place here, in my opinion, but it is interesting.
The Jews and their long-awaited Messiah finally arrived to cause even more trouble, and this is his army.
Nabateans.
How many is that? 9? I have more children than that.
That's funny. I think he said they were Lebatines. I've never heard of that before, but I'm assuming this is representative of the Gentiles that are here, or at least a piece of them. This specific sect. She says, "This is your army. What is there? 9 of them? I have more children than that."
I be your Messiah.
Blasphemy.
Anyone else think we should move to higher ground?
I agree. Rabbi, tell us what to do.
Wow. Are your followers always this strong and intimidating?
Everyone calm down and settle in. Looks like we're going to be here for a while.
Oh, gosh. There's Nashan. He's heading off to Jerusalem, it looks like, to tattletale on them. We got all these people. This is part of the footage from the feeding of the 5,000. Now, it's interesting because in the Sermon on the Mount, we saw primarily Jewish people. But here, we're seeing Jewish people and Roman people and a bunch of different stuff, right? It's not just Jewish people. Which is probably a little bit different than actual scripture. According to scripture, I believe the feeding of the 5,000 was actually all Jewish people, and then the feeding of the 4,000 was Gentiles. And so there is a difference there, and there's a significance that happens there. I think the Chosen is trying to merge the two together, possibly. I'm not exactly sure what the plan is there, but it seems like that. Anyway, so we get the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000 here. Now, later on in episode 8, we know that there's a third group that's going to appear from the trailers and behind the scenes and everything that we've seen. We know that the Jews are actually going to appear as well, kind of these staunch Jewish people, and then we have the Gentiles that are coming from these different areas. Really, really interesting to see how all of it's playing out. Obviously, the feeding of the 5,000 is going to be an amazing, amazing section, but I am wondering if episode 8 is still going to hold that twist at the end, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, episode 7 overall has been really, really good. Really amazing to see Marcus and his father there. It looks like Marcus is definitely going to be the child with the loaves and fish. And so that is going to be a cool moment to see there. Yeah, just a lot of stuff upcoming. I do wonder how they're going to handle the feeding the 5,000 and how everything is going to play out as far as that goes. And what is really going to be important there for them. So we'll see. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sticking around with me throughout this entire live stream. Well, this premiered video, it's actually recorded a long time ago. Obviously, right now, as you're watching this, I'm in Israel. So, yeah, I really, really appreciate it. Love you guys very much. And I hope you have a great, great night. And obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, memberships or Patreon, I'm very, very thankful for you guys. Love you guys a ton. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Keep an eye out for all of our Israel videos. And if you want to sign up for our Israel trip, obviously the links are always in the description down below. We have an amazing guest host that's coming on our next trip, Isaac David, who runs a YouTube channel called Daily Disciple. That is going to be absolutely awesome. I'm excited to spend some time with him. He's an amazing teacher and just an awesome young guy, just living his life for Christ. So really, really excited to have him on that trip. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. You guys have a great night. Peace.